we've got some new folks here. I'm Kathleen Walker, the new mayor, and why don't we go around and introduce everybody real quick? And then we'll get started on the business at hand.
That's right. I am Chris Mean. I'm city councilor, been on council 2.5 years.
Rich Sheldon, I'm the city councilor. I've been there for a little over 4 years now. Don Wilkinson came on with Rich.
Jen Lee, I'm on the planning commission.
I'm Carl Exner. I came up off the gutter over here. Just really quick, I know a lot of people here know about my situation. And I appreciate that. And I want to say thank you to the city council, the staff and all for the memorial gifts that you gave me the other day. I can't tell you how much it really meant to me to see that. So I kind of emotion up here. I apologize, but I'm here and I want to be involved and I want to be able to help things out. On the positive side, on the upbeat side, today at 3 o'clock, you mentioned, what's that, 3 hours ago? My son-in-law from Tonga, there's a picture, please,
Yeah, right there.
became a US citizen after 7 years. I would have been able to get here earlier, but I just before just a little bit ago, we kind of celebrated and we kind of had some joy there. So I'm excited about the future because of that. Anyway, that's it for me.
Good evening, I'm Darren Winger. I'm the chair of the planning commission. I'm also on the economic development advisory board and I'm a business here in Sandy.
Hello, my name's Amelia Page. I'm not on any boards except for this one. This is my first time here, so it's a pleasure to meet you and I can't wait to get to know you.
Welcome.
I'm Linda Malone and I'm on the planning commission also. Redo of planning commission because I was on the planning commission back in 1988. Before going to council.
And
And
she was mayor for
I was the
17
mayor.
years.
I was the mayor.
Minor detail. Rodeo. Put it that way.
But now I'm back to the planning commission, so. And the budget committee, happy to be there.
I'm Jeremy Peetzold and I'm on the standing net board and the economic development board.
I'm Tyler Wallace. I'm the finance director here for the city of Sandy. Tyler Deems, city manager, not to get confusing with the names, but if I reference Tyler, I'm not talking in the third person. I'm talking about him and likewise.
I'm not Tyler, I'm Jeff Prouty, the deputy city manager.
I am also not Tyler. I'm Lindy Hanley and I've been a city councilor for just a few months.
I'm Christina Ramsey. I was voted in January as a city councilor.
On the planning commission before that.
Yep, 2 years on the planning commission.
Well, great. Thank you all so much for coming and thank you for staff for coming to answer any questions that might come up. What we're doing tonight is really going to set the agenda. So we
Just say,
have,
I'm sorry, Mayor, and we do have one member online as well.
oh, good.
So
Okay, I'm sorry, right. Thank you. That's what because I don't have any of the
Right.
cameras up here.
My fault. Mr. O'Leary, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sorry, it took me a second to figure out what to tap to speak. Yeah, I'm Art O'Leary and I'm also a newer member of the planning commission. Glad to be here.
Thank you, Art. I don't have my screen up in front of me, so so we're glad you're here. Jeff's gonna, anytime you wanna talk or anything, it's okay to just, shout out or something.
Or you can
If we're not responding to a raised hand, then please shout out and we'll kind of pay attention. So the agenda is here, it's pretty ambitious, but we are excited to be kind of talking about funding and because that really does set the direction for the future of our city for the next 2 years. And so the first job at hand is to nominate a chair for the budget committee. And I would like to go ahead and nominate Linda Malone since she has been our chair for the budget committee the last 2 times and has done a great job at it. She knows how to do it and knows how to keep us rolling, but also allow discussion. Does anybody have some other nominations?
Yes, I have another nomination, Carl Exner.
Well, there you go, playing favorites. Just throw one out there.
Okay. Any others? Okay, all those in favor of Linda serving as the chair, please raise your hand. All those in favor of Carl being the chair, please raise your hand. Okay, Linda, I'm handing this over to you. You are the chair.
Well, I'm gonna call for the budget message.
Perfect. Thank you, Chair. I'm gonna try to remember to say Chair Malone, but I may slip up once or twice.
You call me Linda.
Well, first, thank you everyone for being here this evening. The budget is a integral part of how the city operates and sets the tone and priorities for what, excuse me, what we will work towards accomplishing over the next 2 years. As many of you know, and I assume that several of you have read the budget message already, the city operates on a 2-year budget running from July 1st of years through even number years. The city of Sandy has a population of about 13,000 people currently. And the proposed budget in front of you this evening is for a total of $188,040,481. It's balanced, which means revenues equal expenditures. It's a state requirement per Oregon budget law. I'm going to touch on several key highlights and changes in this budget. Go through a couple of financial trends and assumptions, talk about the general fund, and then we'll turn it over and get into the conversation around departments
I forgot one thing.
Yeah.
I want to acknowledge, bring to light. I think how many years in a row have we gotten the Distinguished Budget Presentation Award?
So this, gosh, was that the third biennium? I think. I don't know why I'm asking you because you weren't here.
An unbroken streak.
Yeah, so we had a little bit of a break there for a while, but this is, I believe, the third. I think we've received it 3 times. That's also part of a larger Triple Crown achievement that the city has for our annual comprehensive financial report, as well as the popular and annual financial report, which is more of a condensed version.
Congratulations.
Appreciate that. Yes, sir.
As a reminder, could I ask that the people who are speaking refer to a page number on the book so I can figure out where you're at? 'Cause
Absolutely.
you jumped into it already and I think I found where you're at. But
Yeah, so I should say,
Staff-
there should be a what we hope to accomplish agenda in front of each seat. There is a page number next to each bullet point. But we will do our best to recite that page number in advance so that you can follow along. So on page 1, the budget message. Of that $188 million, about 81 million reflects the operating budget, which includes personnel, debt service, materials and services. Got another 82 million in capital, and then about 25 million or so in contingency, and that's really set aside for rainy days and building up capital reserves for our significant infrastructure projects that we have underway. So back in February, the city council met and did their biannual goal setting. During that process, 81 goals and actions were adopted. And you can find those goals and actions on page 7 of this document if you want the comprehensive list. I'm not going to read all 81 of those items, but several of them I will touch on here briefly. The first item that you'll see is enhanced public safety and community livability through code enforcement of the municipal code. We're happy to report that we've set up a $50,000 abatement fund within this budget to help address some of those ongoing code enforcement issues that we haven't had funding available to remedy in the past. And so an example of that would be a derelict RV or a chronic nuisance property that doesn't have the ability to pay for that cleanup themselves. Or oftentimes we have the ability to lien the property if it's on a specific site, but something left in the right of way is really the city's responsibility to clean up. And so this will generate the seed money that we need to proactively enforce and take care of several of those code enforcement issues that we have through town. Another goal of the council's was to complete, adopt, and implement the Sandy Net Master Plan. We'll dive into Sandy Net specifically later on, but just wanted to touch on, we have this master plan that's nearly complete and ready for adoption, just making some last minute tweaks to that. And that's really setting the stage for the future of Sandy Net, where to expand, how to expand, what services are needed to be added, staffing and rate studies and things like that. And so we've incorporated several of the key points of that master plan into the budget, knowing that that's going to be coming down before the council for adoption soon. Another item that is really, near and dear to my heart is budgeting for replacement of assets. We've done historically not the best job of creating replacement funds for our assets and equipment. Historically, we've set aside about $110,000 per biennium. This budget reflects a total of $850,000 for the biennium, setting aside for future assets and vehicle replacement. Still working on a fine-tune replacement schedule, but this is the first step in getting money set aside so that when we do need a new dump truck or a new police car or a new mower, we have those funds on hand and we're not coming to the council asking for use of contingency funds to pay for things that we should have been more proactively planning for.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm gonna breeze over this one because we're gonna dive into a lot of it during the budget process itself, but utility funds, obviously, we have some significant reinvestment in our utilities, both water and wastewater happening right now. We've presented several times before the council and the public on what those projects look like, the total cost of those projects, the need for future rate increases to pay for the debt service once those projects are built. And so this budget does reflect a continuance of rate increases in both water and wastewater to reflect the work that needs to be done. There's also a council goal of investing in our park system. This budget reflects funding for expanding Winterfest and also constructing Deer Point Park, revitalization and improvements to Minot Park, and then also some trail improvements for Tickle Creek Trail, and then a placeholder for potentially acquiring additional land, as one of the council goals was to identify and seek funding for open space and open space preservation and potential locations for either ball fields or other things like that. So we've got some money set aside. There was also a goal to provide support and resources and assistance for community-led effort to establish a Parks and Recreation District, and we've allocated $25,000 in this budget as sort of the seed money for that initiative. Certainly that, could include community surveys to gauge community interest or amenities that they're looking for. It could also be consultant work to help us go through what that process actually looks like. Couldn't tell you if that's going to cover the whole cost or not, but this is the initial seed money so we can proactively start working on that council goal. And then lastly, on this goal sort of overview, there was a goal identified to look into strategies for reducing the utility costs associated with Boarnstead Park splash pad. So as everyone in this room knows, our utility rates for residents in the community have gone up, but the city also pays utility rates just like everyone else. And so our rates have also gone up significantly to operate some of these really great community benefits that we have, like open spaces in our parks, those fields that need to be watered, as well as the splash pad, which everyone really knows and loves, especially on those hot days where you just want to be outside and cool off. And so we did some research with neighboring communities and other jurisdictions of similar size, and found that many of them don't charge themselves for water and wastewater charges for those amenities that are public facing and a public benefit, like our green grass that we have in parks and like splash pads. So this budget does propose no longer charging ourselves for those irrigation costs and the splash pad costs, which ultimately frees up about $100,000 over the biennium in our parks budget for other maintenance and ongoing projects and such. Moving into some other highlights. So the city's reserves and fund balances, at a minimum, we have a policy to have 5% of the operating budget held in reserves at any given time. That equates to about 1.3 million for this proposed budget document. In total, we've got 25 million in reserves or in contingency. 16.8 of that is within water and wastewater, and I already discussed briefly why that is, right? We're building up capital reserves so that we have the funding available to pay for debt service and offset some of that cost for those significant infrastructure projects. Public safety is hugely important to any community, especially in Sandy. We have been historically one of the safest communities in Oregon. I think our police department is well loved by nearly everyone in this community, certainly by staff and council, very well supported. In 2019, we implemented a public safety fee to provide some stable funding to retain 2 officers during a budget shortfall. And since 2019, we have not looked at increasing that public safety fee. Naturally, the cost of hiring and retaining those employees has gone up. Personnel costs, PERS costs, health insurance costs has increased. And so this proposed budget does reflect a $1 increase per month on the public safety fee so that we will generate enough revenue with the existing utility accounts to still pay for the full cost of those 2 officers that were, or for those 2 positions rather, that were hired back in 2019. Notably, one of the largest expenses that the city has is personnel. And we have a proposed increase of 9.07 FTE. That number is a little misleading, largely because some of those increases happened during this biennium, but because of the way we present current biennium to next biennium, it doesn't, there's not a nice, flow chart to say what was originally started in the biennium, what was added during the existing biennium, and then what we're adding next biennium. So we will walk through specifics there in a little bit, but just wanted to point out that that would increase our FTE to a total of 92.76. And then jumping into financial trends, and then I will digress. CPI is a key unit of measure that we use for nearly everything. It's what we base cost of living adjustments on for our staff. It's certainly impactful for the construction costs that we're seeing, all of our materials and services and equipment and things like that that we need to buy. The unit of measure that we look at is every January. And so January of 2025, CPI for the region that we measure was 1.9%. It was certainly more stable than where we've been over the last couple of years. I've noted in here that 2 years ago, that number was 6%. The year before that was, over 9%. So certainly we're stabilizing, but costs have certainly gone up, and that is reflected across the board within this budget. The city has an assessed value of $1.2 billion, and property tax revenue is certainly the largest revenue generator in the general fund. We built in a 4% increase in year one in property tax revenue and a 3.5% increase in year two. Not to go too far into the weeds, but state law sort of guarantees, for lack of a better word, 3% property tax growth. So we're seeing more than 3% because we have new properties that are being developed and coming online. In the past, we've seen years where that property tax revenue has gone up significantly more than 4 or 5%. I think we had 1 year 6.5% just because so many new homes were constructed or new properties were constructed. So, recognizing that the city is in a moratorium and that we've also got some external factors as far as interest rates and other things that are going on that may, tamper down the housing market a little bit. We're being a little more conservative on that property tax growth so that we don't find ourselves in a budgetary shortfall by being too aggressive on the front end. Speaking of development activity, as I mentioned, we're in a moratorium due to our wastewater issues. Obviously, much of the work that we're doing within the wastewater fund this biennium is addressing those immediate term issues that we need to address, and hopefully we'll be unlocking another 190 equivalent residential units. We refer to those as ERUs. You may hear a lot of acronyms. Side note, you may hear a lot of acronyms this evening. Please, we're going to do our best to not use them, but some of them can just roll off the tongue. So interrupt us, raise your hand, do whatever to make sure that you are clear with what we are referring to. The proposed budget does reflect about 220 ERUs being developed throughout the biennium. That's what we've used to establish the proposed SDC collection, as well as some building and planning permit fees and such. Other revenues within the general fund specifically include franchise fees, transient lodging tax, like a hotel tax that a visitor of the hotel would pay, interest on our investment earnings or on our investments and the cash that we keep on hand. All said, that growth from last biennium to this proposed budget is about 11.6%. Already talked about personnel a little bit, so I'll skip over that right now. Debt service, certainly with all the work that we have going on, our debt is increasing substantially. We've got hundreds of millions of dollars in projects. We've been fortunate to get some grant funding, but the vast majority of that work is anticipated to be funded through a combination of loans and SDCs. And so the debt service that you see within this budget document reflects all of our current loans that we have executed to date, and then our best estimate on loans that will start to come due within the biennium. So many of our loans are reimbursement based, and so we have a good idea of what that maximum dollar amount is going to be. But if a project comes in a little bit less and we don't, fund the entire loan, that debt service schedule is correspondingly reduced. So we've got our best guess in here, but that could fluctuate slightly, not material by any means to the budget, unless we get a boatload of money dumped in our lap from the state or federal government, in which case we'll talk amongst the council on how to revise that budget if needed. And then a really important highlight that I want to touch on here is beginning balance and operations. So you'll see throughout this budget document several departments who have a beginning balance of X and spending of that beginning balance for ongoing operations this biennium. And what that really tells us from the finance side is that we've got revenues that are starting to, or excuse me, expenses that are starting to outpace our revenues. While that doesn't create an immediate problem and certainly doesn't have an impact on what we're able to do this biennium, failure to start having thoughtful conversations around the services we provide and the revenue that we generate is going to put us in a not good position going forward. So over the next year, we call it our off budget year. So this time next year, and really before then as well, Tyler and I will be doing a deep dive and several year projections out into the future for the general fund to see kind of where the metaphorical lines of revenue and expenditures cross, figure out where we can stabilize some of those expenditures. And we'll be working with the city council on developing that financial sustainability plan as far as other revenue options that we have and stabilizing our expenditures to make sure that we don't find ourselves in a position that many other communities in Oregon have found themselves in, which is cutting services or reducing staff. That's certainly not, what anyone in this room wants to do. We want to have a robust city with a robust offering of services and great staff to provide those services. And so we're trying to be very proactive in ensuring that we don't have some of those issues down the line like many other cities are seeing today. So all that said, we've created this proposed budget that funds nearly every council goal that required funding. And we'll walk through that as we go into each department and the overviews there. After funding all of those various initiatives and goals that the council has, there is about $467,000 of one-time funding that's still left to be sort of allocated out. And so that will, I assume, be a large conversation amongst this group as we get into the budget process of what initiatives or other goals or action items does the budget committee see as an important piece of the puzzle, and we could look at allocating out that $467,000. On the other hand, the budget committee could say, hold on to it, save it for a rainy day, wait and see what happens over the next 2 years. We've got a long ways to go before we're back in these seats again in 2027 having this conversation. So we'll take that piece of the puzzle and that conversation as it comes going forward. And lastly, to conclude the budget message, I just want to say thank you first to all the department heads that have spent countless hours sort of refining their budgets and looking at past trends and building budgets that really accommodate the council's goals and mission and vision for the future. Certainly thank you to everyone in this room for taking time out of your day and volunteering to be a part of the process. And then a special shout out to Tyler Wallace for all of his work. We started in November and we kicked off budget the first week of January. So we're 7 weeks in and it was already knee deep in spreadsheets and learning all our revenue sources, all of our expenditures. And I'm very grateful for his work and effort he's put into this process. We're proud of this budget document and the work that we've been able to fund and ensure that gets accomplished over the next 2 years. And we're looking forward to having a conversation with all of you this evening and next Monday. And maybe next Monday as well, to get this budget or a budget approved. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. So, first off, does anybody have any questions of Tyler on the initial message?
I just have one quick question. 000 is the general fund, but it's also identified in later things as the Aquatic Rec Center Fund.
So 000 is the middle 3 digits. Our accounting structure is 3 digits, which is the fund, 3 more digits, which is the department, and then 6 digits, which is like the activity, right? Personnel, materials, and services. That middle series of numbers, the 3 zeros, is seen, you're right, Mayor, in 2 different spots. One in the general fund, which is where we sort of collect all of our property tax revenue and franchise fees and general revenue, as we call it. It's also just an undesignated department within the Aquatic and Recreation Center Fund. So there's 2 different, the funds are different, but there are 2 different departments that have that same
First 3
000.
numbers, yes, now I see it's 280
Yep.
000.
Yep.
Okay, got it.
Yep.
They are separate. Okay.
They are separate, fund, yes.
Okay.
If I could actually do one more point of clarification too. So many of you in this room have been through a budget process with the city of Sandy before, and historically we've done a lot of discussion around service offerings and performance measures and things like that within each department. And while that's been very transparent and helpful, I think there's also been some significant time constraints and questions around how efficient and effective have we used the time that has been allocated for this process. So all that to say, Our intent this evening is to really focus on changes from current biennium into this proposed budget, not going into the weeds as much as we can avoid it on minor details, but focusing on the changes from one biennium to the next. We've also developed a plan to sort of, I don't want to say streamline, but maybe more efficiently deliver the overview of each department and their alignment with council goals, and then we'll have the department heads available to answer questions about each department. But I just want to be, upfront with, we're not trying to cut corners or decrease conversation. We're just trying to be efficient with the time that we have. And so certainly if you have questions, please ask them. If questions come up that aren't necessarily budget related, our intent is to just keep those an ongoing list of those questions, and we'll follow up via email with the committee as a whole. But we're trying to really keep the focus on the budget in front of us tonight and the budget process.
Keep it rolling.
Keep it rolling.
Question, Chair.
Sure.
Will we have any public input as part of this budget process prior to it being included in going to council?
We will. Part of the, excuse me, the state requirement of a budget process is to have public comment.
When will that be?
So, we could do it before for any just general public comment. Could certainly take a pause from this and see if there's any public comment that is waiting to be provided. And then historically, I believe we've done that at the beginning of each subsequent meeting as well.
Each subsequent, okay, that makes sense.
It's come up.
I should point out, we did advertise it on the agenda.
Do we have any public online?
No, Chair, we don't.
I see staff behind. you.
Yes, no members of the, well, they're
Yeah.
members of the public, but no
Right.
non-staff member of the
Right.
public.
So with that in mind, I think we'll just move on to page 24,
Perfect.
general revenue.
So you're gonna hear from me a little bit more for a few more minutes. So as I mentioned, to respond to the mayor's question, the general revenue department on page 24 of this document is really the epicenter of the general fund. This is where all of our funding that is non-specific is received. And what I mean by non-specific is that it's not a traffic citation, it's not a rental for a parks facility. This is, property tax and transient lodging tax, state shared revenues, franchise fees. We've got $13.9 million budgeted for general revenue this year. Talked about property tax revenue a little bit earlier on, 4% in year one, 3.5% in year two. We've done our best to estimate as far as franchise fees go, reflecting, whatever PGE's increase in their rate revenue might be and how that trickles down into our receipt of that. Similar with, natural gas and things like that. We also have proposed in this budget document an increase in the transient lodging tax rate. That's currently set at 3%, and that's set by ordinance. So it's in the municipal code is 3%. That's substantially lower than many neighboring communities. Our code dictates that transient lodging tax can only be used for tourism. And as part of the council's objective to increase funding for Winterfest, we also have a lot of other programming that happens in Mining Park. We're proposing an increase to 6% on that transient lodging tax. That's still less than many neighboring communities, but gets us more in line with sort of an average, if you wanted to call it that. It also will help generate the revenue that we need to continue to provide tourism activities, especially in parks or in areas like Mining Park. So the expansion of Winterfest, certainly the support that the city provides for Mountain Festival. We don't cut Mountain Festival a check, but we provide all of the park maintenance leading up to Mountain Festival. Many of the things that go unnoticed, like street closures and barricades and things like that, are all something that the city contributes. Electricity, we don't charge business license for many of those businesses that come in, and then all the park that happens after that. So I'm just trying to paint a picture of, we have a lot of tourism that happens in that park. We've got tourism that's coming into our community for the new base camp at Cedar Ridge Park. And so this is one step in a larger attempt to generate some additional revenue to support some of those ongoing council initiatives like Winterfest, for
Does the
example.
only revenue that comes into the transient come from the Best Western? We don't. do it from
Historically,
any
yes.
Airbnbs or any of that kind of stuff.
It's a great question. Historically, it's only come from the local hotel, which is Best Western. 4 weeks ago, we revised the municipal code to clear up some language to ensure that online reservation sites like an Airbnb or a VRBO, for example, are responsible for collecting and remitting that transient lodging tax. And so our best guess of the revenue that we will generate from that is also reflected in that transient lodging tax number that's presented. Hard to say exactly what that number is going to look like because they haven't historically been paying it. So we know there's at least a handful of short-term rentals within our community. The new code does require them to register, so we will be able to get a better handle on how many of those properties that are being used for short-term rentals are here. But we do have a modest increase to represent.
Ideally, 40 years later, we would get a second hotel at some point.
That would,
It's been a while
it's been a while.
since the Best Western went in. But thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So the general revenue department collects all this revenue that we just talked about, and then it disperses that out to several other departments. And we'll talk about each of those departments as we go through this process. But really what the intent of this general revenue department is to transfer funding to all of the direct service departments that provide a service to the community. And so you can see that in the lower section on page 24, where the revenue actually gets distributed. A small portion of that goes to the city council for their operations. A small portion goes to the administration department, municipal court, library, police, recreation, seniors, parks, planning, economic development, non-departmental, which is exactly what it sounds like. That is anything that can't be attributed to a specific department, non-departmental. And we'll talk about that one here in a few minutes.
Police, not a small amount.
Police is not a small amount, so you will notice that that's a large number that goes to the police department, and that is 22 full-time equivalent employees in that department, responsible for public safety for our entire community. So they do, get the lion's share of that general revenue. And then our parks and recreation sort of system is a close second there. We have included a new department this biennium called facilities maintenance, which historically we've had facilities, buildings and ground maintenance as part of our parks budget. We're separating that out now to more accurately represent what is parks maintenance and what is building maintenance. And so you'll see a small contribution to that facilities maintenance department. And then lastly, about $61,000 being transferred to the Aquatic and Recreation Center Fund. That fund was historically established to take care of the operations of the site that was formerly known as the community campus and the front buildings of the old Cedar Ridge Middle School. We still have some city operations that are conducted on that site. And so that $61,000 really represents just the insurance costs and the utilities costs associated with that building. The
What,
bunker building.
so isn't that go to Sandy Net? I mean, aren't they? the
Sandy
ones
Net
using
takes
it?
for a very small portion of that. They only take up 20% of the building. The rest of it is used as city storage at this point, really. We have some archives there. We've got several library programming things stored there. We've got Winterfest stuff stored there, I believe, as well. So it's until we have a better plan identified for that site and build some additional storage somewhere else. That's kind
Yeah, I
of
was
just,
just kind of wondering about what, because it came up on there.
yep.
Where you had, you were billing them indirect costs too for their
Yeah.
share.
I mean, there is a little bit of, and we're going to jump into indirect costs next, but there's a some back and forth that happens within the budget. We try to treat each of our departments as sort of their own entity, so they have their own revenue and they also benefit from our indirect costs or indirect services we provide. And so each department sort of pays into human resources, IT, finance. It's a longstanding practice that is intended to more accurately represent the cost of service for that department. If you had a police department operating by itself, they would have to have their own payroll services and their own accounting services and their own IT services. And so those transfers are really just to reflect the true cost of service.
Everybody pays their fair share.
Everyone pays their fair share. And that is all I have about general revenue.
Any
Happy to answer any
questions on
questions.
general revenue? You can always come back to it later if something comes up. Then we will move on to page 127, the indirect cost allocations.
I know the print is a little small on this page. Apologies for that. We're gonna try to cram quite a bit of information on this table. So just touched on indirect costs a little bit. We try to treat every department as their own entity and make sure they pay their fair share. But several of our departments within the organization don't provide a direct service to residents. They are internal services. So we call those the indirect departments. And that's comprised of administration, legal, finance, human resources, IT, facilities, maintenance, non-departmental, and then we've got the operations center, which for those of you that don't know, the operations center is down across the street from Sandy Cinema. It's where our public works and transit departments are housed. And so each of these columns, what this table tries to represent, or tries to depict rather, what each department is paying into each respective indirect service department. And so departments such as admin, finance, HR, and IT, the allocation for those departments' funding is based on a combination of staff and operating budget. That's a kind of our best estimate on how to appropriately spread the costs out for finance, for example, right? Assuming that a higher budget means you probably are processing more invoices, so therefore your operating budget is reflected into how that department is funded. Personnel or FTE, the more employees you have, the more HR payroll costs there is associated with processing payroll for those departments. And so it's our best attempt at trying to equitably distribute those administrative functions across the relevant departments. The legal department is the allocation for that is allocated based on a combination of staff, operating budget, and the prior 18 months of actual legal services. So it's been some cities just charge legal services directly to the department that's using that legal service. I guess that's, fine in theory. The problem is that when you have one department that's experiencing a substantial legal crisis, they end up blowing through their budget very, very quickly because lawyers are very, very expensive, right? So this is sort of in an attempt to spread those costs out among everyone. And then no department pays their legal costs directly. They all get paid out of this legal department so that they know what their legal charges are going to be for the year because it's already built into this indirect model. There's no surprises along the way.
Which seems fair, but if you're a department that never gets sued, you're picking up the load for, say, for example, the police department, who might get sued more frequently. I can see where if I was a department head, I would see some inequitability in that. While it's an insurance policy,
Yeah.
against possible, it still would seem a little.
I mean, that's a fair point. You'll see that, the substantial payers of legal expenses in this proposed budget, wastewater, not surprising given our legal,
Situation.
requirements that we have with the consent decree, the planning department, which is heavily related to our moratorium and our ERUs and the allocation of those ERUs, using a lot of legal services there. And police is another, big one as far as legal expenditures. So, a department like Sandy Library, for example, is only paying just under $5,000 for legal services for the entire biennium. So that $250 a month or so. So it's a relatively inexpensive insurance policy for them to have access to legal. Do you want to?
Yeah, just to reiterate, that legal expense isn't split evenly across the different departments. A portion of those are allocated out based on the prior 18 months of actuals.
Right.
And so departments that actually incur more legal expenses over the prior biennium will be charged a higher rate for legal expenses in the next biennium. But to Tyler's point, it allows them to plan for that because it's then built into the budget through the indirect cost model.
So one slip and fall, the library could blow their budget.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just a question on that though. So how come the library on one hand is $5,000, but then between, senior parks and recreation, it's quite a bit, it's more than double that. So what is it? It's like 11, 4, 15, it's like 17,000.
Across those three departments, yeah. So Parks and Trails, I don't have the prior 18 months in front of me, but factoring in their overall budget and then their prior 18 months, any sort of code amendments, for example, that we just did for our facilities use and parks and parks rules. Sorry, I couldn't think of that's the right word. There's a substantial amount of legal that it costs to go through that process. And so
So it's not just lawsuits,
it's not lawsuits.
It's use of legal
It's
staff.
the use of legal
For
services. So anytime we call the city attorney, we get, when we get our bill, it is itemized by department or by purpose. And so it clearly says, parks and trails or wastewater or general administration questions and things like that.
So I see that there's not a comparison for last times biennial allocations for totals of any kind. Would you say that we're pretty close to what we were with the previous one, or did you see a lot of swings in indirect costs for certain changes?
As far as like the percentage allocation and not the dollar amount itself.
Go back to the example you guys have been discussing about legal.
Yeah.
Has it been noticed that Parks and Recreation have met more legal issues and are expected to have more legal issues, or did you see any of that kind of swings from what it used to be to what it?
The largest swing that I can speak to offhand is really related to development moratorium, wastewater issues, consent decree, contract negotiations with the city of Portland for purchase water, things like that. So it's really been utility focused and development focused. Obviously, before, 3 or 4 years ago, we weren't in a moratorium. We were kind of just doing the preliminary work on some of those large infrastructure projects. And so we weren't really phoning the attorney or emailing the attorney at the same rate that we are now.
That makes
So that's the
sense.
predominant swing there. I would say also, if I remember correctly, 2 years ago, we had a couple large insurance claims from a sewer backup that happened. So when we're looking at that prior 18 months of legal claims, that will help or hurt what one department's going to pay. We've also got our facilities maintenance indirect cost allocated here. That's based on building square foot, assuming that a larger building has more maintenance issues and therefore requires more staff time to maintain that building, and prior 12 months of maintenance hours. We use the prior 12 months because that is the only unit of measure we had, and we will have better measurements going forward. Our Parks and Rec staff, Tiana and her group, Rochelle and her group, but Tiana's staff specifically, acquired a very inexpensive program to track maintenance hours. And so they've been able to do that over the last year. And so we were able to allocate out kind of the buildings that are seeing the largest maintenance issues and make sure that they're paying their fair share for that maintenance person. So that's the methodology that's
Regarding on that,
there.
is, under Parks and Trails, again, I can't, if it's based on building square footage, the parks really aren't buildings. And there's not really, there's some bathrooms, but they're not add up to a whole lot. So I'm just curious, is this 13,000 for facility maintenance for parks and trails kind of a legacy of that facilities thing from, everything being in the Parks and Trails budget pot?
I don't believe so. We can dive into that and get you a more well-rounded answer.
Okay.
My recollection was it was based off of repairing yeah. And I don't think repairing, well, maybe Bridges was. Do you have any comment offhand, Tiana, of what was repaired at the parks, or should we just follow up with this a bit later?
We probably could follow up later, but I definitely do a lot of more of a facilities maintenance type repair across our park systems for our structures and restaining and rebuilding bridges and plumbing concerns within our restrooms, within our park systems. So there are things that fall under that skill set of this new facilities individual will be taken care of, whereas the actual park maintenance staff will be able to focus more on the landscape and the irrigation systems.
Okay, so I would expect that to go down in the future because all that facilities work, y'all are already doing it. And so that's just part of your parks work. Whereas this facilities fund is intended to kind of, the light needs to be replaced here. No, whose light is that? So I hope that we can kind of see that go down. It's not a big deal, $13,000, but still,
As we continue to,
Yeah.
you know, track where hours are spent, we'll be able
Yeah.
to, you know.
And this is
get
kind of for the
better.
general office space and stuff for,
Moving forward.
yeah.
Chair. I just wanted to make an observation, going back to Carl Exner's question about will we see trends? I just point out that this page here is a summary page of just the current year, but when we get to each one of these accounts, there's an indirect line item where we can see the change from each biennium. And I think that's an appropriate time to
Easier
ask
track
these
it as we're
questions.
doing each.
Yeah.
Each budget.
Fund by fund.
Great point.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Good question, Chair. I'm aware that the STCs for Parks and Recreation is quite a bit up in this last couple of council decisions. How is that reflected in some of the things that you've allocated in this area? You do a lot of work,
With the moratorium, it probably isn't reflected that great yet, because you only go up the SDCs if there's.
but there are houses being built. It is making a difference.
But we're not talking about SDC.
So-
here.
Yeah, SDCs don't move the needle
Yeah.
on any of these numbers. This is based on operating budget. SDCs fund, you know, the capital construction costs, and capital is not part of the operating budget. So any of these unit or any of these departments that use an operating budget as a piece of the metric to generate their specific allocation, SDCs don't swing it one way or the other.
Different column when it gets to each department.
So next week's budget, next week's discussion.
Correct.
Capital projects.
Okay.
One last point, did I just interrupt you, Mayor? I'm sorry.
No, go
Oh,
ahead.
okay. One last, you know, comment here on indirect service costs. We've got non-departmental. As I mentioned earlier, non-departmental is exactly what it sounds like. It's anything that can't be attributed to a specific department. So a couple examples of that, you know, the city is a member of the League of Oregon Cities. League of Oregon Cities provides a great, you know, service and resource to cities. They have their own lobbyists. They have, you know, model ordinance examples and council rules and things like that. So we can't really attribute that to a specific department, but their membership fee goes to non-departmental and, you know, everyone benefits from that. And so the non-departmental budget is, half of it is allocated out to the departments that are housed within this building because we utilize City Hall and we got to pay for the utility costs and minor repairs and maintenance somehow. And then the other half is attributed to all direct service departments. And again, that's assuming, you know, police benefit from League of Oregon Cities membership or National League of Cities membership or other, you know, non-specific memberships and subscriptions and things that the city is paying for.
So those memberships fall here, actual conferences. If you're sending city council, that would fall under the city council
Correct.
budget. If you're sending planning commission, it would go under the planning.
That's a great point.
But
Yes.
the membership.
The
itself
membership,
is-
because we can't attribute it anywhere, is housed here, but yeah, if you go to an actual conference, then relevant to that.
All done with indirect. Let's move on to general fund departments, starting on page 62 with non-department. Non-department.
It's page 62, non-departmental. I'm gonna just keep talking about non-departmental for a second.
Yeah.
Non-departmental houses all of the expenses that can't or don't apply to a single department. And sort of other miscellaneous expenditures that the city incurs, as well as our general city contingency, which is 5% of city operations. And so in this budget, some key items to note: we don't have any staff that are billed out of this. Every employee is billed to their, you know, relevant department. On the expenditure side of things, materials and services creates or reflects the creation of that $50,000 abatement program that I mentioned earlier this evening. And then in the transfers line item, there's $400,000 budgeted. 50,000 of that is to continue to expand Winterfest. 50,000 of that is to purchase a vehicle in that newly created facilities department. Right, we're proposing adding a body, but that body needs to be able to get to facility from and to each facility. So 50,000 to get that vehicle. And then we've got 150,000 for capital repairs and replacements to city buildings. Historically, for those of you that have been around a long time, we called that our facilities maintenance internal service fund. That has been retitled to be asset replacement. So if we start talking about a different name, that's what we're referring to. And that's really the holding pot for large scale capital improvements that need to happen. So, you know, fixing a plumbing issue, the relevant department's gonna pay for the maintenance of that sink that needs to happen. But the police department needs a new roof, and that's a capital expenditure. It's over $5,000 and has a useful life of more than 1 year. It's gonna come from this asset replacement department. So we're setting $150,000 aside for that. And then setting $150,000 aside for vehicle replacement. As I mentioned earlier, we haven't really been proactive in planning for those vehicle replacement costs. It's been, oh, this biennium, we need 4 more. Let's figure out how we're gonna pay for 4 more. So this is starting that trend of proactively setting aside funding so that when a vehicle does unexpectedly die, or when a vehicle, for example, like we had a vehicle get totaled a couple of years ago, the insurance payout is not enough to go acquire a new vehicle, right? So if we have those unexpected things that come up, we'll have money set aside to be able to do that without impacting the general fund budget.
I have 2 questions. First one is the vehicles, why is it put under non-departmental as opposed to each department's vehicle?
So. Oh, that myself echoing back?
I thought maybe that was Mr. O'Leary, but.
Okay. Why is it put under non-departmental? So.
As
Each of,
opposed to each
Yeah.
department that has said vehicle.
Particularly
So-
the police department, will they transfer money or try to their vehicles too? Why would that be different?
so this is specific to general fund vehicle replacement. And so you know, it's a tiny little bit. Each of the utility funds has their own set aside for future asset replacement or equipment replacement. So that's half of the answer that you're, that I'm gonna share. The other half of that is that it's gonna come from the general fund no matter what. If the police need a new vehicle, they're heavily funded, you know, huge percent of their budget is paid for via property taxes and other general revenue. So it's gonna be a transfer from the 000 general revenue line item, or general revenue just allocates money for general fund vehicles, which really is only police vehicles and parks vehicles.
But then we don't get to kind of the point earlier of everything else. We're not really getting to the nuts and bolts of what it truly costs to run a department if we're not counting for all the equipment within the department, correct?
Well, so this is just the holding spot for those funds so that it doesn't get absorbed or rolled into or allocated to a different expenditure, right? So if the police do need a new vehicle, for example, we would transfer the money out of this holding pot, for a lack of a better term, into the police department. The actual expenditure would be reflected in the police department's budget. So you will be able to track long-term where the expense actually falls. The concern that I have with just creating a line item within like the police department example, police department budget, for example, is let's say they don't have any vehicles that need to be replaced that biennium. They don't use that $50,000 or whatever it is. Our only tracking mechanism is a budget note somewhere to say $50,000 is rolling forward from last biennium to this next biennium and should be set aside for a vehicle.
So it's not transferred there until they get.
It's
the
really
vehicle.
easy to use it for
It's
something else.
really easy for it to get absorbed elsewhere. And so the intent here is to keep it sort of locked away so it doesn't get absorbed for any other purposes until it's actually needed. And then we'll transfer it to the relevant general fund department, who will then acquire the equipment that they need.
Jan had a question. Yeah.
I had one more real quick, if I may.
Oh, what's up?
Sorry. And then the $50,000 abatement program fee, how did we arrive at that number? Is that based on historical data or is that?
It's not based on historical data, partly because we haven't done a
Any
great
history.
job of abating some of those things that need to be abated. So it's really been based on a good estimate of what we know, recent RVs that have been towed. I could think of 2 examples. You know, one was about 4,500 and one was like 5,500. So we're trying to just get a ballpark of, okay, let's call it 5,000 per RV. You could do maybe, you know, 5, 6 RVs, and then we know what it's cost to abate a specific property on the other side of Mining Park. And that was several $1,000s. So just kind of, you know, pulled together a number that we hope to be reflective of our need over the next 2 years. It could certainly be more than that, depending on the enforcement issues that we see. Part of the intent here, though, is that some of those chronic nuisance properties, we can abate it, and then we can lien the property. And once that property is sold, we'll collect the revenue back. And so this is, you know, for lack of a better term, the seed money to start this program. RVs, if we have derelict RV that's on the street that needs to be abated, we're not going to see a dime of that money back. But anything that's happening on private property, we can lien the property for, and we'll get that money back in. So the intent is to hopefully see not a dollar for dollar, revenue and expenditure correlation because of what I just said, but certainly see some of that money coming back in and just sort of have this cycle of once you get the seed money put out there, some of those abatement issues being able to pay for themselves going forward because we'll just be able to recycle it.
It's also a disincentive to having that derelict RV on your property.
I mean, it gets spendy to clean those things up.
Jan?
Yeah, so often the equipment funds are based on depreciation schedules. Are you thinking in the future you might move more towards that concept?
Yeah, so we still need to identify a good asset replacement schedule. I think Tyler has his ideas, I have my ideas, and we have our actual how quickly things, get damaged or need to be replaced. And so that'll be one of the endeavors that we take on over the next, couple of years before we have the next budget process, is to identify a better asset replacement schedule so that we can clearly show we've got 7 vehicles in 4 years and then back into that number. We were able to do a better job of that with some of the utility funds because we knew there was going to be some replacement needs for a dump truck and some other equipment that when we get into the public works departments, we could talk about those specifically. So those numbers are a little bit more honed in on future replacement cost schedules in the general fund. This was, our best attempt at not still providing enough revenue for all the departments that need to continue their operations while also getting something set aside to start that practice of building up the reserves so that when we do have those issues come up, we'll be ready for them. Go.
Sorry, if you don't mind, it's just a quick follow-up. So that does allow for reserves to be carried over into the next budget, but there's not expecting that we're gonna go through $150,000 in cars the next year.
Correct. So we've allocated that 150,000. It's held in a contingency line right now. It's not allocated for any purchase. Will there likely be a purchase that, is required? I'm sure we'll have a vehicle issue at some point throughout the biennium.
So how many cars do we go through? What did you give it a year in the last 5 or 6 years?
We can follow up with you to give you an actual answer. I could give you a wild guess, but I would hate to.
We kind of batched them, it seems like.
Well, yeah, I mean, we've. That's a fair statement. We've batched them, which probably also hasn't been the most effective because it took care of the worst, but not necessarily what we truly needed, but we didn't have any cash on hand to pay for what we needed. So it was kind of what we could afford for that biennium. And we're trying to not have that problem again, right? So we can get on the cyclical cycle.
Yeah, I would just add that the $150,000 is not an estimate of what we think we're getting for general fund vehicles in the next biennium. What it is it's, the start of a new practice that we want to have of having this fund available and start to build up funds over the bienniums to, and hopefully have that paired with a detailed asset replacement schedule for vehicles and for other things that we're setting aside for. So we're not there yet. It's meant to be the start of that, and $150,000 is meant to be the start of that and what we can afford without having to decrease general fund allocations to other departments.
I found my answer.
Okay.
I have one little, so you've got police and parks and trails. Does that mean those are the vehicles that are gonna get replaced in that department? And the other part of that question is so I know there's kind of general, what do you call those car, anybody can take the car, pool cars and stuff. Is that gonna be dealt with or in the future or maybe?
It would be eligible to be used under this, pot of money, the pool car, yeah, gosh, I guess it's not relatively new any longer, but it's very low miles. It runs fine. It serves our needs. So we have no expected short-term need to replace that vehicle. The other vehicle that is operated out of the general fund is the code enforcement vehicle for our planning department. That's operating currently. It's definitely older, but that would be when it
Does
does.
the library have vehicles?
Not currently, but it will in the future. We'll have an outreach vehicle.
Yeah.
I think that's probably more of a policy
Right.
discussion though around, do we want the library to pay for the next outreach vehicle themselves, or do we want to build that into this sort of replacement schedule? And then we can discuss the merits of that.
Okay.
Yeah. So the last thing I'll mention about non-departmental, oh, did you just have your hand up? No, wow,
Rest
my
of my
eyes
head.
made it look like your hand went like, right like that. The last thing I'll mention about non-departmental, this is where the 5% of city operations is housed. You'll see the very last line item on the detail, which is on page 64, shows $1,767,000 in contingency. That reflects the 1.3 million that is the general city contingency that we need to keep at 5% of operations, plus the $467,000 that hasn't been allocated out to anything. And there's nowhere else for us to plug that number. So it's reflected here in contingency until the budget committee or council provides direction on where those funds should go.
there if we don't.
Correct. If it doesn't get allocated, it will just stay there. Yes.
But little question on that.
Oh.
So, but there's also, the beginning balances is, for all the departments that use general funds are kind of, it's like, I wouldn't want to say that we're going to set aside 10% contingency plus all the, contingencies that are in each
Yeah.
department.
So fair point. I'd like to mention that. Best practice is to have 10% of operating in contingency. That would be what the Government Finance Officers Association recommends a city do. We keep 5% in non-departmental. When you add up the contingencies that are housed in every other department, that gets you to like 9.1% of city operations. So we're very, very close in that regard. So, finance guys, maybe I shouldn't speak for you. Contingencies and reserves are good things. We like that. Several years ago, some of you may remember that our contingency was exceedingly low when we bought a facility that we didn't have an operating plan for. We hired, staff that had ongoing, salary expenditures with one-time funding, and that number was down to about $140,000 at one point. I've spent a lot of my time as finance director and city manager trying to get us built back up into a safe spot where we have money set aside for those rainy days and those one-time expenditures, not ongoing expenditures that are allocated out of contingency. So I would say a little bit more never hurts, right? But certainly, point taken that we do have almost 10% of city operations housed within the general fund with those other contingencies.
Okay.
I think Jan had one.
There was
And I
a
do too.
large jump in professional services. Does that anticipate something special?
I couldn't hear the question. I'm sorry.
Oh, there's a large jump in professional services, and I was wondering if that anticipates a special program or something.
So
20,000.
yeah, 25,000 of that reflects the funding for this community led Parks and Recreation District effort. So that's where that $25,000 was plugged. And then let me just look at
There's 100,000 left.
it's only 100. Yeah.
So more in there.
Or Tyler, one of us will tell you in just a
Yeah, you
moment.
can just tell me later about that. Thanks.
I had the same question, but it involves two things. Mine was about the contractual services, but the other one's professional services. Goes from 20,000 to 125,000. And then on a side note, just a side question for me. I understand how we use like professional services or insurance goes across all departments and you could use that. Why do we have contractual services under non-departmental instead of something like legal?
Yeah, so contractual services, excuse me, in non-departmental reflects like landscaping costs of this building, cleaning services in this building, the annual alarm fees, copier and mail machine charges, those like general expenses in operating a city facility. So we don't bill out the copy machine invoice, 6 different ways to the 6 departments that are here. It's just coded to one spot. And then on the professional service side of things, that is Parks and Recreation District formation that I had already mentioned. There's also money set aside there for the decorating, Winterfest decorations that happen on this building. So the lighting of City Hall, the trees out front, the downtown tree lighting that takes place down Proctor, all those expenses related to putting up those lights and taking down those lights.
And those were getting charged to parks, I think, before, weren't they?
I don't think those ones were. I think originally, years and years ago, that was paid for out of non-departmental, because I'm sorry, economic development. I believe. And so some of this is just cleaning up costs that were charged elsewhere that didn't really make sense elsewhere, and they weren't really attributable to a specific department, so we're getting them to a place that maybe doesn't make perfect sense still, because there's not a great place to house those expenses, but this is sort of, you know, the miscellaneous place to catch all those city expenditures that don't have a good home.
So then explain to me what designates the difference in contractual services versus professional services, because you just said we use landscaping and contractual, but I would consider that professional services. So how do we distinguish the difference between the two and I know that's detail, I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's detail. It's frankly, there should just be one line item that says like services we don't provide. I mean, that's outside services, yeah. It's just a long-standing, you know, 2 different GL accounts that were created long before my time here.
But professional services are usually consultants and stuff like that, whereas contractual services are janitorial, landscaping and stuff like
I
that.
mean, the professional services, you know, I can't guarantee this is how it is actually administered. But I think the intent would be similar to what you just said, right? The professional services are not ongoing. They're normally like shorter stint, one-time expenditures or something that's highly specialized, and the contractual service is something that is historically
They're just your
ongoing.
biggest expense items.
Yeah.
And they also have some of the biggest jumps. So,
Yeah.
like,
Well, part of that,
Standing out.
part of that big jump, 2 years ago when we were sitting here, we should not have budgeted $20,000 for professional services, looking at, you know, the trend from the prior year being at 86,000. So some of this is just really a true up to reflect what our actual expenditures are, plus, of course, you know, inflation and increased in cost of services for some of those things.
I would say that's true across the board as we're going through these worksheets. Many times there'll be a jump in there from the prior biennium that doesn't necessarily make sense, but a lot of times that budgeted amount is based on the actuals from the current biennium, which came in quite a bit higher than what the budgeted was, and we're anticipating them to remain higher.
Blaming that prior finance guy, I got it.
Yep.
Some of these things are gonna be addressed when you get to the actual individual departments. But right now, we're gonna go to page 28 and administration.
So you've heard enough from me. I'm gonna turn it over now to Tyler Wallace.
So we're gonna talk first about the indirect service departments. We went through that indirect cost model a little bit ago, and we're gonna talk first about those departments that receive funding from that model. So the first one is the administration department, which includes the city manager, deputy city manager, and a portion of the communications specialist position. That communications specialist will be a newly created position for 25-27 with the goal toward being responsible for creating and delivering consistent and thoughtful communications for the city, work with departments to continue to increase communications quality and quantity, and identify and implement ways to continue to facilitate more public engagement and decision-making processes. So for the administration department, the funding methods are consistent with the prior biennium. A large amount of the funding is through that indirect service revenue. That's $893,000. There is a general fund allocation of $135,000, which is a little bit less than the prior biennium. The majority of the requirements in this department are for the personnel costs. That's, you know, salary, benefits, PERS, you know, all that stuff. That's pretty much the entire, makes up the entire increase on the prior biennium is just inflationary escalations in those salaries, and then obviously that newly created communications position. And then finally, contingency is set at 2% of the operating budget, which is about $20,000, which is $20,000. Anything to add on that one, Tyler?
Yeah, I'll just add one thing, and you may have mentioned this, and I just didn't hear you, but that communications position that we are proposing to add, that is really just a reallocation of an existing staff or an existing budgeted position. So we historically had an economic development manager in light of the moratorium and reduced, economic development capacity that we have currently, we're shifting what would have been that salary into this communications role. And then we have a small expenditure for economic development consultant work built into the economic development department budget that we'll talk about later. So just want to be clear that we're not adding a new FTE with this communications. This is just a
Just
shuffling of
reallocation.
existing. Yep.
Okay.
Question.
Done.
Did HR used to be part of administration? Is that new for this year?
HR historically had been part of finance.
Part of finance?
And this current biennium in 23-25, we separated it out to its own department.
Thanks. So when you have recruiting as under administration, then that's specific for administrative positions?
Correct. So. Do you want me to keep talking? Sorry, trying to. So HR will pay for the basic recruitment costs at our, handful of basic places that we recruit. So League of Oregon City's website, Indeed, enter another name, right?
Public works specialist areas
Yeah.
or libraries or that. kind of-
Departments will pay for anything above and beyond that standard. So like if you're gonna go recruit for a new city manager, hopefully you're not, that would come out of the administration department. If you were gonna recruit for a new public works director, public works funds are paying for that. So you got your basic services housed under HR and then specific services housed under a relevant department.
Question there. Computer equipment, so you have a 0 for ongoing computer costs. Obviously, you have computer costs.
Sure.
I noticed that on a couple others, but not all of the budgets for that.
Yeah, so there's basically 2 FTE within the department, and I think with the 0 is representative of, we're not anticipating need to replace any computers within the department for those 2 people to spend.
Does computer software fall under that? Like your Microsoft licensing and everything that you have to pay annually, your antivirus, your Adobe, and then where does that get filled?
It does, a lot of that is built through the IT department.
Okay, so that's part of the whole, by department, you're moving money over for those costs.
Yep.
But that didn't include the hardware side of things. For ongoing replacement of computers throughout each of these different departments.
Correct.
Is that right?
That's correct.
So hardware was still dependent on the department itself.
Yeah.
Versus having it be.
Yep.
And you'll notice in the IT department, when we get there, we've set aside $75,000 this biennium for future, larger scale equipment, server refreshes, things like that. So that the big ticket items, we're that seed money that we're setting aside, and then individual departments pick up the computer when you get.
So we're not on any rotation and for your hardware because it's based off the department's ability to pay for it.
Greg will talk, what? Hardware like my laptop,
Exactly.
those are not on a set replacement schedule.
Amended.
This communications specialist position, is this a new like human being that's gonna work for the city, or is this something we're contracting for? And then when it says a portion of the communication specialist position is paid by administration, what are the other departments that are paying for that person?
It's the water and wastewater.
Okay. And so is it an actual person or is this the contract that
An FTE?
it's a whole new FTE?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, this
It's a
reshuffling. it, yeah.
Right,
Yes.
reallocation of
Yeah.
FTE, but we are going to actually have a
a body.
employee of the city of Sandy that's communications.
Yep.
So you get 0.15 under this department of that additional.
0.5 is in this department.
Yeah, I thought it was.
That's what it looks like,
Add up.
0.15.
The biennium to biennium.
Well, so there's other salary adjustments that take place or that have taken place. So you can find a detailed FTE summary by department, starting on page 121. Not to get into the weeds, but I'll try to do this quickly. We allocate our staff based on where we best estimate their time to be spent. And so, for a long period of time, you had a deputy city manager who was also the finance director, who was billed for almost exclusively out of finance, but really doing a lot of work that wasn't finance related. So last biennium, we tried to split that up. This biennium, again, further separating out, we have a dedicated finance director now. There was pulling back of that FTE out of that department. Shuffling around Jeff's salary from his prior role into the deputy city manager role. So the FTE table will help sort of answer a lot of those questions about who went where. And then I was gonna add,
I will add, though, also, not to, the wastewater folks are funding some communications consultant work, right?
thank you, that's what I was gonna add. So yes, we have a communications person that we're budgeting for the ongoing communication needs of the city. We also have a 6-month contract that we signed with Praxis to help us sort of jumpstart our communication endeavors, get a lot of that high level messaging out, figure out the communications plan, get our talking points in order. And so we'll have that assistance over the next 6 months, maybe a little longer if we feel like we need to have that a little bit longer. But the intent there was to sort of get us on a communications path that we can then implement next year ourselves.
Next few weeks. Okay.
Okay. Any more questions? Can we move on to legal? Page 29.
Thank you. So legal. The legal department accounts for legal representation and services for the city council, Sandy Urban Renewal Agency, city manager, and all city departments and funds. Legal services also include developing city ordinances and resolutions, enforcement of city codes, defense of lawsuits, and legal advice for city council and staff. So as we talked about earlier, instead of directly charging departments for legal support, those expenses are billed to this legal department. And then the department is in the indirect service revenue model and receives indirect funding from all the other departments. Budget. The funding methods are consistent with the prior biennium. The legal department is included in the indirect service model, includes 300,000 in indirect funding from the other departments. And then you see city attorneys under the revenue requirement section. That's a $50,000 increase from the prior biennium, and that's from anticipated potential legal issues due to some of the large scale infrastructure projects that we're working on next biennium. Yeah, I don't know.
Nothing additional from me, no.
Any questions?
I thought there, on the. Where did I see it that the total legal stuff was like 800,000? Did I see that? Am I imagining? Maybe was that where you remember where you showed who's paying what towards it? What page was that?
Yeah, so if you're talking about the indirect cost model, that's on page 127. Finance department's the next column over, which is 897, and admin's one column prior, which is 893, but the legal is 300,000 on there. Yeah, I don't believe we have 800,000 referenced anywhere for that.
Yep, sorry about that.
Yeah, if we don't use the whole 250 this budget biennium or the 300,000, will that just roll into being the contingency for the next biennium?
Yeah, that would fall to ending balance, and then depending on what our anticipated needs were for the following biennium, it might lead to a lower requirement for indirect service revenue for the following biennium.
One quick question, where does our drawing a blank on the name of the company that we use to defend us in lawsuits and that? CIS, thank you. Where does that fall into this?
Good. So CIS is our insurance carrier. They cover us for property, liability, auto, all of that. We allocate out that bill amongst all of the departments. The lion's share of that is out of non-departmental because we can't attribute the liability side of things to a specific department, right? We don't know who's going to have a liability issue that arises. So non-departmental picks up the lion's share of that cost. CIS, as an insurance company, covers us for those types of lawsuits. And so at most, generally speaking, we would just be paying a deductible of $10,000, which could be absorbed within this department budget, or, if it was a park lawsuit or something like that, we would just look to see what department had the available funding to cover that liability cost if we were tight in the legal department itself. But our exposure becomes pretty our financial exposure becomes pretty small because we are in a pool with 92% of other Oregon cities and counties, right? So we're all paying into this big fund with CIS, City County Insurance Services is the acronym. And then, it's just a big insurance pool, so it helps stabilize our costs and keeps us a little more protected that way.
What is it, what is the actual line item called? Is it insurance or is it,
It's, yeah,
so that's the
that $275,000.
275,000 in there is
Yep.
CIS?
Yep.
Okay. Next item, finance, page 32.
So the finance department serves internal customers in a variety of ways, including receiving and dispersing financial resources, accurate and timely recording of all financial activity, monitoring financial compliance with various requirements, and providing support and financial management. The department is also responsible for utility billing and includes billing collections for Sandy Net. So on here, you'll see reflected an increase of 2.55 to 2.55 FTE, which restores levels to where they were before the decrease last biennium. This increase reflects having a finance director and adding an accountant position beginning in 26. The accountant position is needed to help offset the additional work from our number of large capital improvement projects, including vendor payments, as well as reporting, grant reporting and loan reimbursements. It also remedies some of the internal control weaknesses identified in our audit because it provides another layer and allows for more separation of duties. Moving to budget. The beginning balance is budgeted at around $90,000 due to not having a finance director for the good portion of the prior biennium. The finance department is included in indirect service revenue model and receives or will receive $897,000 in indirect funding from other departments. 71% of materials and services is related to the cost of the annual audit, and it shows up under contractual services. Contingency is set at $19,000, which is about 2% of the operating budget.
Can you kind of clarify the increase in, I understand the finance, we have now the finance. Well, we're doing it and adding another finance position.
An accountant position, yeah.
Right, and so, but we're also, it's more than one FTE increase, so can you kind of just clarify?
I'd have to look at the personnel cost allocation, but I believe a portion of that is in 23-25 was not having a finance director.
I think you're talking, Mayor, about the jump though from 1.3 to 2.55.
Yeah.
Right,
It's more than
so
one, so I was
part
just-
of, part of that is the prior budget had the finance director at 65% of their time in the finance department and the
Oh,
other
okay.
35% outside of the finance department.
Okay,
This budget has 90% of the finance director in the finance department and 10% in urban renewal for the financial services that they provide for. So again, it's one of those reallocations.
yep, still two people, so.
Still two people, yeah. Yep.
Jeremy has a question.
So I see where the revenue is coming in for the finance and the one before the, but where is it coming out of? Because I know on page 1.7, we talked about this, the indirect costs, allocation. So you see the revenue coming in there, but each department should see something where they're paying that out of, and I haven't seen that line item, or am I missing?
So on what it was at 127.
1.7 is where you talked about where, how much each department is paying into
Indirect.
the indirect services, right? So indirect should be coming out of each one of these budgets.
Yeah, so if you look at that top section in green on that page, you'll see like admin, legal, finance, and then you go to the bottom and say 897,000. So that's what finance requires for indirect service revenue. And then if you look at the numbers under direct services.
I'm sorry.
127, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, she's 1.7.
And then if you look at the numbers are the departments in white below the green header. If you look over to the right, you'll see what each of those departments is paying into it. So
Right, so
each of those departments, like 024 down through 027, so city council down through urban renewal is paying into that model. And then in, like I said, in the indirect cost allocation, those departments in green, so admin down through non-departmental, Those are all recipients of those indirect costs, and those numbers are the bottom under total.
I think the other
Right, but I'm
piece
not,
of this, we're hitting all the indirect service departments first to get through those as for the less complex departments. Indirect departments don't pay
That's-
themselves.
there you
So
that's what I
it's-
was saying,
Yeah,
they don't
they don't.
pay into it for even the services they use with inside their own department.
So recipients don't pay into it.
For the other pieces of it, like technology and these other things.
Right, correct, yep,
Okay, I just,
yep. So
I was
all
missing it, but I,
all of the indirect service departments are funded by anyone that provides a direct service, but they don't fund each other.
okay.
Okay. Page 43 is human resources.
But Human Resources Department serves all departments of the city of Sandy for the HR needs, including job description development, recruiting, hiring, benefit administration, payroll, and many other things. For the budget, it's pretty much status quo from the prior biennium. The Human Resources Department receives $351,300 in indirect funding from other departments. And 93% of their overall budget is for the 1.2 FTE in the department, which is the HR director and then a portion of an accountant of payroll. And then 2% of contingency, 2% of the operating budget is contingency, which is $6,500. And the last thing I'd point out on here is the indirect service revenue actually decreased from the prior biennium because there was a healthy beginning balance.
In large part because it was the first biennium that was separated out HR and we weren't quite sure, you know, how to fund that and what the total requirements were gonna be for that department. Our HR director, Angie Welty, is also here if you have any specific questions about HR. Yeah, I think we've got a.
Is that why we're seeing drops in a lot of things like insurance, which I've never seen ever drop ever?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
I was just asking if that's why we're seeing lots of drops in things like insurance.
Yeah, so that's a great question. The way that we build our personnel budgets is we take an accurate listing of all of our employees, all of their current insurance benefits, all of their, you know, salary step increase dates. It's a actual projection, not a, you know, the salary range is X to Y and you just pick a number on it. And so, you know, a big decrease here is the reflection of whether or not an employee in this department takes our health insurance that we provide, and that's why you're seeing that reduction.
Moving on. Information technology, starting on page 65.
The Information Technology Department is responsible for supporting all city departments with the implementation and maintenance of technology needs. The department is included in an indirect service revenue model and receives indirect funding from other departments. And the budget includes $798,800 in indirect service revenue. There were no changes to FTE for the department for the next biennium, just inflationary cost escalations driving personnel cost increases. Capital outlay actually decreased significantly for the biennium from 225 in the current biennium to 71,000 for the next biennium. And this is a result of a lot of replacement that was just done in the current biennium. So as a part of our overarching strategy to better plan for and budget for asset replacement, the IT equipment set aside fund was created an asset replacement department, which we'll talk about I think probably next meeting. But the IT department will make contributions to this department based on projected future needs. And so the goal here is to smooth the expense for replacing IT equipment for the city.
So you don't
There's
have
a-
the jumps of 225,000.
Exactly, so you don't have a huge amount one biennium and then have a-
20,000 to 200,
Yeah, exactly.
And Greg does have a nice replacement schedule. His best estimate at a replacement schedule, which is how that $75,000 was identified. So we'll continue to do that over the next several biennium.
What is the major change in contractual services?
I think that's a great question for you.
Some upcoming software renewals, so some are 2 years, some are 3 years, some are 5 years. We're coming up on a couple that are between 3 and 5 right now that are like one's $32,000 and then a couple other ones are in the tens of thousands. So it falls in line with this year that they're all kind of lining up.
Chair, I don't know that Art's gonna hear those comments. We wanna,
Yeah,
when we're bringing people, we might wanna get them closer to my.
Sorry, Carl. Just need me to
Can you
reiterate.
repeat the question? I didn't even hear it. Oh.
I was just pointing out that.
No, I
people on
heard
the
you.
phone couldn't hear.
Yeah, no, I heard.
Jan's question or committee member Lee's question was related to the large jump in contractual services from the prior biennium to the proposed budget.
And the answer for that is that there are some software renewal licenses that come up that are kind of oddball years that don't happen every 2 years. And so there's several that are upcoming in the next biennium that are inflating those costs right now.
So those aren't like consultant services, those are actual
Correct. So
software.
on the IT budget, most of the contractual services are software licenses and agreements that they're not, well, we're not a capital budget, so yeah.
Great. And just to clarify, that transfer to IT set aside was kind of to create sort of like the vehicle funding thing, is that what I heard? Okay.
Yeah, set aside for future
Yeah.
improvements, but also just to smooth the cost of improvements from biennium to biennium.
So Chair, this arena has, I think this one has this doesn't have the loans that were set aside for the Sandy net though, right? There's no loans involved in here at all.
Nope, this is just the internal IT operations of the city.
Just
So
over
Sandy,
the
that's-
actual department and
Okay,
stuff.
right.
So just, because there's some wild changes, I just want to hear it again. So the computer equipment dropping is partially offset by the transfer to IT set aside. Is that related?
Yeah, that was the capital outlay that I referenced. Basically, there's a lot done in the current biennium, so the 23-25 biennium, there was a lot done, and then so less is needed in 25-27.
And so kind of like we talked with the assets in general, you're moving to kind of flatten this out as we go forward.
That's the goal, yeah.
Do you want to pursue that for licensing as well, since that's on a 2 or 3 year cycle? It seems like maybe the dollar amount doesn't justify it, but the concept's the same, right?
Yeah, we didn't really talk about the licensing. You know, to your point, the dollar amount isn't nearly as significant as the capital side of that is, so it wasn't high on our radar of things to fix or plan for. By getting that 75,000 set aside for the actual equipment going forward is gonna certainly smooth things out.
And the revenue will increase with more. Customers. We have only 80%. We gotta go for that 20% that don't have to say anything.
Well, that's in Sandy Net. This is just our boring internal IT services, but
I can add one other piece here. We've kind of in the past done more ad hoc asset tracking and we're formalizing that here now. So part of this was discovering some of those that were not on previous budgets. And so I think we're going to see shifts over time in terms of software and how we better allocate it out to departments or per user basis. And like everything else with the software as a service, it tends to go on every year between renewals. So
Do y'all have a nice high quality plotter in this building?
yeah.
Yep. Kelly's department, I think it's yours. It's Public Works and yours, yeah. We do.
Cause that's gonna come in needed for communications and stuff like that. public meetings and.
Any other questions on IT?
Yeah, just off the budget, I know we maybe trying to avoid talking about it, but 2 years ago, we spent a lot of time talking about how do we beef up our IT, make ourselves more secure, we allocated money, there's some things that came out of that. What, we had DEQ recently get hacked, we've had schools that have been shut down because of problems. What's our protection plan? Is this sufficiently funded to make sure that we don't hit a headline with something similar? Do we need to invest more in that space?
Quick question. We have a disaster recovery plan that we test so that we can restore as quickly as possible. I would say the thing that would need more improvement is stopping the threat at the front door.
Right, do you need more money to do that, I think is the question.
In this budget cycle, I did not allocate significant amounts towards cybersecurity for that. I would say we will do what we can, but I would also say that there's never enough as well, so.
Well, can I ask the question different? Because I'm not trying to put you on the spot or get you crossways with your boss over here.
No, well, can I add something before you ask your question? Just to, there's always room for improvement,
Well, that's
right?
the next
There's
question. So if
certainly
you had
more we could do.
$100,000, would that make a difference in our security and our ability to withstand a threat? And fill in the blank with any other number, I don't care, just make that one.
Yes. Yes.
But that might be something to bring to the next meeting and just say, you
Yeah,
know,
I'd like to see a proposal.
yeah.
Yeah, in your spare time. Right.
It doesn't have to be a big,
No, I'd be happy to
yeah.
take a stab at it.
Because with that extra contingency money we do have, we might want to throw some there if we know what we're
I mean,
doing.
you have some money that's unreserved, right?
Yeah.
460 some odd.
Yeah.
There's an opportunity, to me, that's.
I don't know about everybody else, but I'm starting a little list over here as things come up. And number one on the list right now is cybersecurity threat. So if you have things you think might want to be pulled out of that 467, make yourself a little list, and when we get through the easy night, which is tonight, just these simple. Because next week on Monday, Cinco de Mayo, we are gonna be having each of the departments, which are not as easy as what we're doing tonight. And we still have 11 more things to get through tonight.
So a
So
way to celebrate.
with that in mind, let's move on to mayor and council on page 25.
Well, we skipped facilities
I
maintenance.
thought we did facilities maintenance.
Well,
Oh, no,
we
IT.
talked about it
Excuse me.
earlier, but.
Yeah, facilities maintenance, page 70.
Great, take a break at some point.
We're gonna take a break in 20 minutes if you're good.
I'll see. Well, we'll see. I may have.
If you have to take one now, we can go ahead and take one now, but I was
It's all
thinking we take a break at the halfway point, which is about 20 minutes for that. And we can hopefully get through my line item is reports, which is 3 more things. And then we'll just have
I like your challenge.
9 to go.
Got
when we
it.
Come back from break. Okay, facilities maintenance, page 70.
Thanks. So the facilities maintenance department is a newly created department in this budget, as we talked about earlier. This department will be responsible for repairs and maintenance of city-owned properties and assets. And so this has obviously been a pain point without a designated department charged to do this work. Right now, this work is falling largely on our park maintenance department. So the facilities maintenance department is included in the indirect service revenue model again, and will receive $270,000 in indirect funding from other departments. And this department is also proposed to receive $185,000 in general fund revenue. The $50,000 transfer from non-departmental, as we talked about earlier, is to fund the purchase of a vehicle to support the newly created department and the new facilities maintenance lead position that will be in this department. So just to kind of contrast a little bit, we talked earlier about the general fund asset replacement, plan to have vehicles purchased out of this vehicle replacement set aside. And so this is a little bit different than that because it's a brand new department, brand new person in there. And so we're just going to fund that directly out of department. And then the final thing I want to highlight on here is the contingency is set at $90,000.
Which is about 2% or 1.9%.
Yeah, so the goal, if you didn't pick up on this, is the indirect service departments, we try to target 2% in contingency. That was a desire of the budget committee 4 years ago, I think, because there were some indirect service departments that had wildly large contingencies and no intent on spending them, so we tried to have some better limits put in place for those indirect service departments.
So like legal's double that though, right? Because I was doing that math along the way and it was like 3.8%.
Yeah, legal is a little bit higher, and that's sort of just how the numbers shook out.
And then human resources was short of that, like 1.5.
Legal is more
It's-
likely to use their
I was gonna
contingency.
say.
There's the
Aspect.
2% a target, it's
Yeah.
not an exact.
I was just looking
Yeah.
for your methodology towards.
I just wanted to go back,
contingency.
you know, 4 years ago, there were some wildly fat contingencies from departments that had a huge amount of discretion to spend it on whatever. And so our direction at the time was to shrink those so that bring them back to the general, so at least they have to go through Tyler and then depending on the dollar amount, come to us. And so it created some more transparency.
And it does make sense to leave larger contingencies in departments that are more likely to actually use them, like legal. Okay. Anything else for facilities?
You know, I'm thrilled that we now have this department so that we do have a clear understanding of what facilities costs and that it's not all in parks. But I am a little bit wondering about, first of all, so we're gonna have like 1.3 persons, and I assume the 0.3 is probably supervision or something. And so that's, you know, one person trying to clean gutters and all that other stuff. I mean, some of this stuff would seem to be a good thing to contract out. And so the fact that we don't really have hardly any contractual services at all seems a little bit suspect. I guess that machinery and equipment, that's your new vehicle,
Correct.
okay? And so, yeah, I mean, and maybe that's just, you know, kind of getting it started or whatever, but you know, it's like, you know, painting buildings and pressure washing and fixing, you know, leaky roofs and, you know, all those kind of maintenance items. Some of that stuff is gonna be done by contract, I would assume, so just having some, I don't know, how's that gonna happen? Does that get paid by the department or?
Exactly, so, you know, I'll use a really simplified analogy of like a light bulb, right? It goes out here, the facilities maintenance person is gonna come and change that light bulb, but the department that is housed in that department, or in that facility rather, is paying for the actual
Supply
supply that is
got it.
needed, yep.
All right.
So this is really just the personnel cost center for the most part. The one thing that you may notice on here is $50,000 set aside for professional tree abatement.
Didn't notice that, yeah.
Yeah, so a little bit of backstory here, not to get too far into the weeds, but we have several areas throughout town that are just green space. It's not a park, it's not a trail, it's just green space that the city owns. And what's that?
Gilberry.
Yeah, and so we, over the last couple of years, especially with some of our more severe winter weather that we've had a lot of trees that have either come down or been significantly damaged that don't reside in a park. And so this is the attempt to mitigate those trees that need to be maintained and dealt with, but not charging a cost to the parks budget that shouldn't be eating up, or it shouldn't be eating that cost.
Great.
We've had to absorb that in other budgets elsewhere during this biennium, specifically non-departmental, to pick up some of those costs because the parks budget has been tight. And so this will give us that flexibility to abate the trees that need to be abated when there's an emergency.
Right, thank you.
Did I get everything? You good? Okay.
Any more questions on that item? We'll move on to mayor and council, page 25.
So the mayor and council department accounts for expenditures related to city council business. There's about a $212,000 beginning balance. Most of this is attributed to the $500,000 in additional general fund allocation from the prior biennium. There is a $131,000 general revenue allocation for this biennium. And this is significantly less than the prior biennium, where that additional $500,000 was allocated. But that 131 does line up pretty closely with what was the biennium before that. Materials and services includes funding for counselors to attend the League of Oregon Cities conference, as well as general costs for running city council meetings. The council budget pays into the indirect cost model. This is $70,000 in transfers. So this is the one thing, to your point earlier, this is the first one that we talked about that's paying into the model. And that's the $70,000 in transfers. contingency is set at about $202,000, which is 2% of the operating budget plus the 200,000 that was carried over from the prior year is that $500,000. Yep.
Couple $100,000.
Yeah, on that one.
I would just add that during this biennium that we're currently in, the council allocated $300,000 of their contingency for some police equipment and salary for a new officer for 1 year. And so that's why you see this reduction from 500 and change down to 200 and change. So the money didn't disappear. No, nothing weird there, but it's a big decrease. So I just wanted to note that that was what it
Council
was.
salaries.
Yeah.
You can vote on that one.
Actually, that was gonna be a legit question, minus the non-counselor, one of the non-counselors in the room. These folks do a lot of work for the city. We're getting
Free
these
internet.
similar, some of those size cities that do offer some form of compensation for those folks. What does that look like potentially going forward, or kind of where is that mark? Has that been discussed internally?
Yeah, so that's frankly not a staff-led discussion. That's a council decision that would need to be voted on and implemented. My understanding, the lawyer is not in the room this evening, but my understanding is that or at least what I've seen other cities do that have switched from not compensating council members to compensating council members, they can't benefit from it. So it would take effect to the next person that goes into that seat. Otherwise, they're essentially voting for a increase, for themselves. So it would be a multifaceted sort of rollout if that ever was the direction that we wanted to go.
I do believe that no other city the size of Sandy in the state of Oregon compensates their counselors with anything more than a per diem when they're at a conference or something.
Yeah.
They're not compensated on a monthly basis. And in fact, the city council here wasn't compensated even until we got our internet. And instead of having a police officer deliver the packets to the front doors of all the counselors the day before a meeting, they were given free internet so that they could access their packet online. But other than that, there's been no compensation for the last ever.
Politically kind of a uncomfortable and awkward thing to propose from council members.
Yeah,
I'm also
start an initiative.
one.
Let's see how that goes.
Let's see how that might go. You want that. Does this one include the stuff for the improvements on the council chambers? Without another area? Because I've yet to see it done, and I know the previous councils, wonder where that came from. Hope that was a good idea.
Yeah, that is a council goal, that is not reflected in the budget for you this evening because it comes with a larger facility conversation that we need to have. Staff had intended to, and the calendar just got away from us, having a larger urban renewal goal setting meeting to talk about potential improvements to be made to this building with some urban renewal funds. It's, identified as a eligible expenditure. We've invested some urban renewal money into this building in the past, certainly at the library and police station in the past as well. So that's a subsequent conversation that'll happen hopefully in the near future, but
Sometime
not
after May 12th.
sometime after May 12th.
So
Yeah,
but there's no specific sound or audio upgrades proposed in this budget. It's maintaining the status quo.
Yeah.
It's more than a facility, it's a public involvement issue too. Several folks have said they couldn't hear some of the conversations.
You have to come to a meeting and you sit in the audience, you can't even hear all of the council.
It is absolutely without a doubt an improvement that needs to be made. But staff's intent or my intent was to have that larger sort of conversation around this facility. Part of the improvements that need to be made to this room, granted our audio and visual in nature, yes. There's also just an ADA access issue in this building. That ramp's not ADA compliant. The restrooms are, problematic from an ADA standpoint. And so the intent was to have a larger conversation around some of those improvements that can be made at the site in alignment with the council goal of discussing, space needs and improvements that need to be made to ensure that we have access and room for staff and programming and everything else.
I haven't reviewed this urban renewal budget yet, sorry. This was enough to get through, but
Yeah.
my understanding is that we do have the ability to include the needs that we've talked about just now in that. So it's not like a wait 2 years kind of thing.
No, absolutely not. Not a wait 2 years. Frankly, I don't know what it costs to do audio and visual improvements, right? And when you start doing one step of the process, but not the whole process, it becomes difficult. I mean, if we're talking audio visual improvements in this room, likely you're probably removing the ceiling tiles or maybe going through the floor in some fashion because this is a floating floor. And so if you're doing that work, would it have made more sense to talk about a comprehensive, upgrade to this
It would
room?
need to be comprehensive, because you don't want to
Right.
do one thing and go, oh, now we have to do this and you tear out the stuff we just did.
And frankly, plugging a number of $50,000 or something felt really disingenuous from my side, not having any idea of
Sure.
what the cost would be.
Sounds like that could be part of that 467 thing we could discuss in a different day.
Okay, why don't we, right now, we've got 10 minutes till 8, let's take a break and come back here at 8 and start with municipal court. Can we move forward now?
No, we're not.
And the thing we're moving forward with is page 30, municipal court.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. We'll have Tyler Wallace just jump right back in.
So the municipal court department is the judicial branch of Sandy's government. The municipal court judge is appointed by council. The department is responsible for court trials, collections, or citations and fines. So first want to call your attention to an omission on this on budget page number 30. The table down towards the bottom, it accidentally omits the 25-27 proposed budget, but all that detail can be found on the following page, on page 31. And so the next version of this budget document will include that fix.
Okay.
So as police put additional emphasis on traffic enforcement, the result is additional citations. Municipal court revenue increases kind of as a result of those additional citations as they get the revenue for the payment plan fees and other administrative
I was
fees.
pretty sure salaries haven't gone down.
Yeah.
They did go up.
That's right. That's right. There is a proposed increase for the next biennium of 0.22 FTE over the prior biennium that restores the department closer to the pre-pandemic levels as citations have increased. And then the majority of the increase in the total proposed court budget is attributable to an increase in personnel costs.
Can you clarify is the salary, is that person an employee of the city?
Yes.
Okay.
So essentially that person is mostly, there's somebody right now that works part-time, and most of their time is attributed to municipal court. For the next biennium, they'll be working more hours to work those citations and work all those.
So all $95,000 is salary for this one person? That's what I was confused about. A 0.69 FTE is making,
Well, keep in mind that's over 2 years.
okay, good, yeah.
Clerk and two other things, if you look at page 121.
But like insurance went up from 1,000 to 43,000. Can you talk about that?
They are not eligible for insurance currently because they're under our required hours to be insurance eligible. Going into the next biennium, this position will be benefit eligible with their new number of hours per week. So this reflects the insurance costs associated with for 2 years. Insurance costs for 2 years. Yep.
So are we planning to have it more than one day a week, or what's the plan for more work?
Yet to be determined, like how many days a week or how often we would hold court, but the person works will work pretty much every day. Working at accounts, sending collection letters, sending demand letters, things like that.
Okay, so this is a clerk person that's upstairs. Okay, this isn't the judge down here. no.
Correct. So the
Okay.
judge is accounted for down below under municipal court judge.
Okay.
So the salary is not the judge, the salary is the clerk that will work.
Okay, so the indirect
Yeah.
support costs, that's the judge?
No,
It's the $12,000.
municipal, okay.
yes, 608,300, yeah.
All right, okay, now I understand, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so really the volume of work, if I can just
Yeah, go ahead.
add something. is not the municipal court day. I mean, certainly there's a lot of foot traffic and people in and out of the building that day, but it's all the follow-up. It's the failure to appear letters that get sent out when someone doesn't show up to court. It's the following up on the payment plans. It's the suspensions that go to the DMV and the release of the suspension that goes to the DMV. It's the collection efforts.
Bureaucracy.
There's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that goes into making the municipal court work. It's not so much just the couple hours every 2 weeks that the judge is here.
Okay, because this is like an $80,000 increase. And so are we going to seek, I'm looking at the citations from before, it went from 1,623 and 1,508 and 24. Are we on par to Chief Husky? Are we gonna be rocking those numbers higher?
We're gonna get our reputation back.
Additional citations, we're working on it. Onward.
Okay, well, I'll support this 80,000 increase in municipal court if we see those citations increase.
Is that city by Eugene that makes all the revenue from getting tickets on?
I would like to ask a question to that point, though. Like, I am gonna ask the kind of the hard question there, and that is, what is the point in not going to the justice court and keeping our own municipal court?
So at the,
Can you kind of clarify the question for everybody else?
yeah, so Counselor Sheldon's question, or Budget Committee member Sheldon, Rich's question was, what's the reasoning behind continuing to operate our own municipal court and not using justice court? And the simplest answer to that question is that justice court would take 50% of the citation revenue if justice court were to be our municipal court. And so we would immediately lose 50% of the citation revenue that goes to the police department. Trying to flip to that page. So we have $460,000 budgeted in this next biennium of municipal court fines. That would immediately be cut in half if we were to or transition our municipal court to justice court. So you get about $230,000.
But we would also not have to give 213,000 to in general fund revenue. Is that correct? So we would actually come out $15,000 ahead.
Can I say something though? That person works as the backup.
Can you come up just to the microphone?
So this is not my department, but I was just gonna comment, because I've worked in City Hall for 14 years now. That individual that serves as the municipal court clerk is literally the one of 3 people that work at that counter. So if somebody's on vacation and somebody else needs to take lunch, that's the person that's working the counter. So you might see a $15,000 savings, but then you would have no person at that counter for many hours of the week. Answering the phone, dealing with the public. That's what I was gonna say.
Thanks, Paul. So yes, there'd be a modest savings if we did do that. The other factor at hand, and I know Estacada just went through this, they transitioned to justice court for their court, but they still have to operate a municipal court for their municipal code violations. And so with our continued enforcement of the municipal code and our endeavors around that, we're still gonna have to have some sort of a court here. We have the space for the court clerk, we have, the citation volume coming in. It didn't seem like a large enough
Isn't there also
financial
the convenience
savings.
to local citizens to be able to come locally as opposed to?
There's certainly a convenience to some residents. I mean, I don't have those numbers in front of me, but a good portion of our citations are issued to people that are passing through and are not city residents. But yeah, the potential savings didn't quite seem like it was enough to pull that trigger at this time. Certainly if the trajectory continues where we're collecting plenty of revenue from citations and it just doesn't warrant the municipal court clerk being here, that's a policy conversation that we can certainly have with the council, but at this point, it just didn't seem like there was enough of a benefit to open up those conversations. I would add one other item, which is the benefit of having our court locally. For many of our officers that live here, they can easily get to and from our municipal court for trials when they're needed. There would be an added cost, of course, for them to travel to less justice court.
And a short
more
volunteer of officers when that happens, because we're not knee deep in officers.
Fortunately, we are not knee deep in officers.
So why do we choose to fund it with, and I realize this is a robbing Peter to pay Paul question, but it does go to, I guess, a lens that I'm looking at for the police department later on. And then, so why do we choose to supplement the municipal court with general fund revenue as opposed to it being kind of a self-funding mechanism?
So I can tell you what my understanding from past administrations has been, and I haven't changed that practice, so I'll just start with that. There was a concern, as I understand it, around the judicial branch of the city being the one to benefit from the enforcement of those citations, right? So could it be argued that the judge or the court clerk are instituting this fine and charging you this fee because they're just trying to make their budget balance? And is there a public perception issue around the court benefiting from actually adjudicating those citations versus we're just the processor, right? We set the time, we take your payment. The most we collect is, the suspension fee or a payment plan fee, but the citation revenue does not fund the court. The court's completely separate from the individual that's writing the
Couldn't the
citations.
same argument be made that the police are only giving out $462,000 in fines to fund the police department and not?
That was,
It could.
that was gonna
I
be
mean,
my
Yeah,
argument.
Yeah.
and there's
It looks even
several,
worse with it.
Later
there's
on.
several other cities, I don't have numbers to say like what the percentage is, but there are several other cities that I know of that have the citation revenue go into the general fund just as general revenue. That's just gonna increase the general revenue transfer to police by that same amount. If that's a presentation or structural change that wants to be made, I have no issue with
That
moving
might
the
be
money
it.
around. That's not a budgetary impact as much as just a,
But since that's not
Presentation of the
covered under
revenue.
this current budget, we're not gonna make that sea change under this current budget. That's a thing to be tabled for later, to possibly either go to justice court or to see that the revenue that currently goes into the police department comes into another fund and directly funds the court. But that's not for tonight or even last week. So let's move on.
Why does abortion come under fines and fees?
Did I answer that? Yeah.
What is the question? Why 10,000?
so the municipal court collects just the payment plan fee for their time to actively manage the payment plans that our defendants enter into, as well as the suspension fee. So if you get suspended, we charge a suspension fee for our time it takes to process that suspension and submit it to DMV to actually suspend the license. So
Entirely different from the citation.
Yep,
It's on
they're
top.
just,
Entirely different
interest.
from the citation, but under the same account. Fines, fees, assessments.
yeah, fines, fees and assessment is just the larger
Larger bucket.
roll up that we present from a just like budget law category is
So
that.
if you flip to the following page on 31, you'll see the equivalent is just court fees. So it just gets rolled up on 30, which 30 doesn't even present the 25, 27 as I open with.
So the 30, is it 31,000 in court? No, okay, it's good.
So on page 31,
Got
if you look up towards the top under 477,000
Oh.
court fees, you'll see 15,000 budgeted for next biennium.
Essentially just administrative fees that the court collects.
Now that
Okay.
50% from the current.
Last question I had is, so our code enforcement officer, Chris, and, are, like, is that, do they go through this court? And so,
If it makes it to the court, yes. I
Right,
They
mean,
don't
there's
just
an
come in and pay
appeal,
the fee.
there's an appeal process. So a code enforcement, development code enforcement issue, Chris will issue that citation. They have an appeal timeline that they can appeal it to.
but the money's all going to police.
No, if Chris in development services writes a citation, that citation goes into his
Okay.
budget. And the
Right.
police department, they write a citation, it goes into their budget.
Okay.
Yep.
Sandy Library?
Sandy Library, page 34. Not to be confused with the.
Sandy Library offers traditional library services as well as high-speed internet access, downloadable ebooks and audiobooks, databases, and the ability to receive and send information online. The Sandy service area extends from Boring to Wildcat Creek Road and serves over 28,000 total residents. The Sandy Library resides in a city-owned facility of 11,620 square feet and will be open this upcoming year for 56 hours per week. The projected beginning balance is about $305,000, which is consistent with the prior biennium. Intergovernmental revenue accounts for the Clackamas County Library District revenue for the Sandy City area, for the Sandy service area, excuse me. That's about $2.8 million. General revenue allocation is materially smaller than the prior biennium. Of $206,000, and about 90 of this is to cover the debt service on the library construction loan. Personnel services and materials and services are fairly status quo with the prior biennium. Capital outlay of $120,000 accounts for the Sandy library portion of the balance on the library outreach vehicle to upfit and make it operational. And this was one of the council goals, and we're pursuing grant funds for this vehicle, but we wanted to highlight that we have it built into the budget, ensuring that there are funds regardless. And then finally, there's contingency of about $7,000.
I'm confused. We did a capital outlay of $174,900 in the last biennium. And what was that for?
I believe that there was a significant portion in capital outlay for that service vehicle or for that.
We gave them $150,000.
But I think that there's a significant portion left to, like I said, to upfit it, to make it operational.
Well.
Are you saying what's the other
confused.
24,900?
What?
Are you saying what is the other 24,900?
Well, I mean, we gave them $150,000 for the bookmobile. And so that should be, so I'm wondering how we got another 24,900 out of it. And then where's the 127,000?
So that 24,900 is computer equipment and other office and furniture equipment that was purchased.
Using what funds?
District funds.
Okay, so because the agreement that we had was that the rest of it was gonna be grant funded, and now I'm seeing where they're spending almost $300,000 out of library funds, and
There's
I'm not
90
really happy
in-
about
In
that.
this current biennium that we're proposing, there's $96,000, but if you look in the, there's a donations line in the detail, $51,000 is in there. And we're hoping to get grants and fundraise for most of that 96,000, but I can't count on getting 96,000. So it is coming out of district funds. Whatever we have to make up is coming out of library district funds.
Well, I mean, there's already.
But it's going through our budget because we're gonna hopefully get grants and fundraise the money.
Well, there's $116,000 that's, general funds going to there.
Right, so the general fund has always made a modest contribution to the library, and it's been decreased over the last several years. If you look back at 1921, the library got $339,000. That wasn't for capital expenditures, that was just the general fund supporting library operations.
I know that, and I'm supportive of that, but here's the thing. The whole idea of that bookmobile is that it's, that we funded half of it. Okay, so the city of Sandy residents funded half of that, and the idea was that there was gonna get, we were gonna get the other half with grants. Now, I got $110,000 for grants for the city, in the last 5 years with not a whole lot of effort. So I didn't think that having, 140,000 or something worth of grants was a huge ask. And, I think the intent is that we have staffing, we have programs and all that. And that, making this allocation out of the district money is not the intent. As I've been told, we're not supposed to be using capital stuff, investments with the district funds.
That was changed. The Clackamas County Board of Commissioners changed that.
Have we signed the new IGA? I don't
I
think we have.
think I should clarify that slightly, Sarah. They didn't change it as much as they clarified their
Clarify,
position on
yes.
it. There is no new IGA. The county, at the advice of their legal team, basically said, yeah, we don't see that as an argument and we're not gonna take that position and you guys can do what you want to. Similar to how all the other libraries have been using their district revenue.
Well, I'm gonna, I just. I mean, basically what we're saying is that we've got almost $300,000 for the bookmobile out of either city funds or district funds. With no need for grant. I mean, isn't it a $300,000 item?
It's a $320,000 item. And when we look at the Hoodland budget, you'll see that the Hoodland budget has the funding coming out of the district funds for their amount of the vehicle. Hoodland has already paid $10,000 out of this current biennium from their contingency for the vehicle to get the $160,000, because the budget committee last biennium awarded us $150,000, right? So that $160,000 plus, the $10,000 plus came out of the Hoodland budget for this biennium. For that.
For this
down
coming
payment.
biennium?
But no, this is the
The
current
existing
biennium.
biennium, okay.
If you had to
For
make
that
that
down
initial.
And how much is coming out of the next one in Woodland?
So over $50,000 is in the Hoodland budget to get the vehicle. But we're still hoping to get grants and fundraise. I just can't count on that because there are 3 grants available currently for sure. That we can apply for, and each one awards on average $15,000 to $20,000 per project. So if we got all 3 of those grants, we could get a decent amount of grant money and we're still fundraising. So we started fundraising in February and it's building slowly. Sandy has currently fundraised $3,500 for the vehicle and Portland has fundraised $500. We're
Well, I'm
planning to
gonna,
go to the farmers markets to get.
Yeah, I'm not worried about 1,000 here and 1,000 there. I'll just go offline. We'll talk about this offline.
We'll
Yeah, I
also
will just-
have it when we get to the
Yeah.
next week's.
Mhm.
Can I just
I will
ask
add-
an administrative question about that money then, just hypothetically? So, because I see you got 96,000 in this one, you got 54,000 in the other one, which is the 150 you need to make up the difference. If you grant fund and you get all the grants and you fundraise and you get all the fundraising, what happens to the remaining money that's in here? Is it dropping to contingency or is it going back into the city council?
District
into
funds.
The
It would
district fund?
roll forward into beginning balance next biennium. Whatever is unspent in 25, 27 will be beginning balance in 27, 29.
So it's money that's earmarked for library that will stay in the library.
Correct. And Oregon budget law does require that you budget only things that you have a reasonable expectation of revenue receiving or expenditures that you're going to incur. And so the reasonable expectation is that we're going to pay for the remaining half of the bookmobile or outreach vehicle or whatever the appropriate name is. But those grants are a hope. I mean, we could budget it and then if we don't get it, it would essentially be increasing contingent, we could budget revenue of $80,000 in grant revenue and then increase contingency by that same $80,000. And then if we don't get the grant revenue, be using contingency to offset the revenue that we didn't get, or budget more conservatively here and not reflect that grant revenue in this with the expectation that we will apply for that grant revenue. I believe it's July when all of those are due.
Or if you did it the same way you did it this biennium, you could put that money back into discretionary contingency. And then if the fundraising wasn't gathered, the city council could rule to give another gift to the library to make up the shortfall in funds.
I wouldn't go for that.
Right? I'm
We've
just
already
saying.
given
I know what you're saying, but
$150,000.
Yes.
Well,
that's
a
the
bunch of
alternative.
I would
grant
have
money
some
out there.
questions on where the
Yeah.
library, where the bookmobile is mainly gonna be serving.
Yeah.
And if it's
outside the
mainly
city.
serving outside the city
remember what you
limits, I think we need to be talking to the county
Now we're getting
and to
300.
Hoodland. Because if
We're not-
Sandy is
we
gonna
weren't
end up
first.
funding the thing 75% of the cost, but none of the benefit of it is gonna come to city residents within the city limits because it's outreaching out into the county.
So,
That doesn't seem
so that's
equitable.
why it's budgeted out of district funds, because remember, 2/3 of the library service areas are outside of the city limits, are people who live outside of the city limits. So all of that 2/3 of the population, if we take it out of district funds, is paying for that vehicle.
But the district, the district, the 150,000
Came from the city of Sandy.
came from the city of Sandy. And that's half of that thing, none of which is gonna be used in the city limits of Sandy.
Oh, no, it's gonna be used in the city. We're gonna go to all of the schools. We're gonna go to
So
parks.
that's why I'd like to see a
Yeah,
plan for that.
We're gonna
but
go
that's-
to Avamere. We're gonna go to the
That's
senior
nice.
center.
Yeah, all outreach within the city limits and outside.
Yes.
Tyler, I want to ask
Very
you a
good.
question.
Chair.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, I see that you've lost an employee each of the last 2 bienniums. How does that impact what you can do?
We'll see. Right now, I feel like we have enough of a staffing level to have one person out of the building. So my goal is to be out in the vehicle 3 to 5 days a week. So one person who would normally be in the building will be out with the vehicle, and we'll have a volunteer as our second person. So that's the way we're gonna staff it in the beginning. And then we'll see sort of how that plays out and if we need to add additional staffing.
Great. What was the 51,000
That's the grants that we're expecting. Fundraising
from
and grants.
who gave? 51?
So
They're
the
applying for
grants
it.
we're gonna be applying for, that's what that $51,000 is.
So you have that
And
already?
fundraising.
No,
they're applying for it.
that's,
Rich, you have a question?
No, go ahead. Are they done?
Are they
Did you need
done?
to answer?
No.
Okay, my question is, so in here, if I'm reading this correctly, is budgeted within district funding. Is that budgeted in district funding for the the bookmobile? Already, or is that going to come out if, as like the contingency, you don't grant right? Does that make sense? No, I asked it probably all the way around.
right. So we have some of it in the revenue line, that $50,000 in the donation line.
Okay.
Is hopeful from grants. That's,
So
so.
this is a hope right here.
And
Yes.
donations.
And donate, yeah, and
Donations, okay.
fundraising.
So this isn't realized yet.
No,
Okay.
But we have,
So-
but you're saying that we have another 50,000 out of the Hoodland Library?
60,500 out
But
of
Hoodland Library has 50,000.
60,500.
60,000, and then 50 here, 51,000, plus the, where the 120,700, plus the 174 from 900 from last year. So now we're way over the
no,
cost of the
I don't
vehicle.
know. I don't know where you're getting the 120,000. What line? are you-
100 on the
In the
capital
Sandy
outlay,
Library, capital outlay.
120,700 for this proposed.
So if you look in the detail, under library equipment, it's $96,000. Is the remaining amount that the Sandy service area
District. Right, but there's.
has total. So that
Where am I supposed to be looking?
$51,000.
I'm
Page,
sorry.
It's on
page
page
38. 1, 2, 3, 4, like 5 or 6 lines
Okay.
from the bottom. There's library equipment, 96,000. The other capital expenditures, furniture and office equipment and computer equipment is just general replacement of computers at the library, the copy machine breaks, you've got, you need a new scanner. Help me out with other equipment you might buy or computer
The other
things.
one's on page
It's
69.
Software.
unrelated to the outreach vehicle. It is
It's just
just.
$96,000 for the outreach vehicle that we
I'm
have.
gonna ask my question just a
There's
little more. direct.
23,000 for computer.
How much are we budgeting from district funding for the bookmobile?
That whole amount would be from district funding, the 96,000, if we don't get any grants or if we
Right.
didn't do any of that fundraising.
So 96,000. So and that's already factored into the district funding, or where is that coming out at a
It's
cost?
already reflected in the budget.
I don't think,
Already
so,
out
I don't
of-
think that's an accurate statement.
So-
I challenge it.
So if it is, so if you were to fundraise this 96,000 and it was to go back into district funding, would in theory, would I see a drop from the 206,000 from the general revenue?
You could.
Because we wouldn't have to fund. No matter what, at the end of the day, I think all of our concern is wherever that money comes from, at the end of the day, we are making up that gap from general revenue.
Yeah, so the 206,000 has zero to do with the outreach vehicle. That number, not related at all. The 206,000 represents the city's ongoing commitment to paying for the debt service of the library building, which is 90,000 for the biennium. And then another $115,000 of just general support to the library, which is the same as what was in the current biennium, 23-25, and significantly less than what had been funded for the prior, at least 4 years that I have in front of me, but longer than that. The staff had heard, 4 years ago, I think it was 4 years ago, the desire to essentially limit the amount of general revenue that was being contributed to the library because the library receives district funding and the library should operate within their district level. And so 2 years ago, we brought a budget back that had a $133,000 decrease in general revenue allocation. And in this biennium, we did not increase that general revenue allocation. We kept it entirely flat. So, if there's, we can have a conversation around if you don't want to, contribute as much to the library. There's certainly, not a lot of cushion in the library budget.
There's obviously, to push back a little bit, there's obviously $90,000 in cushion built in somewhere. Because we're making up what was supposed to be done by grants.
On
Well, the
page,
grants never,
It was when we agreed to the book. loan.
right, but a grant's never
That's right.
guaranteed, right?
I
So
agree, but
we went into this, acquisition knowing that there was some risk of not getting grant funding. We've built in fundraising and grant revenue of, 51,000 of that 96, so we're really talking about $45,000 of district funds being attributed to the purchase of this vehicle. Ideally, we'll get more than $51,000 in grant funding and donations. But this was a conservative approach to ensure that we didn't put in, a full 96 and then not get it and then have to eat through the contingency. We didn't want to put zero because I think there's a reasonable expectation that we'll get some grant revenue and some fundraising revenue. So it was kind of a, conservative, middle of the road, whatever the right term is, to ensure we built a budget that reflected the remaining costs associated with the acquisition of the library outreach vehicle. While also not putting the library in a position where if they don't get grant funding, they're having to cut services or cut programs elsewhere and not, being so negative about our expectation of receiving grant revenue that we go into the budget with a reduced service offering, right? We try to find that sweet spot of what was reasonably, expected that we could receive.
on page 35, the transfers, there's a roughly $86,000 change between the last biennium and this one. Where does that 86,000, where's that accounted for, the jump?
I think the largest thing, contributing thing is going to be the indirect support costs. For this next biennium is 358,000, for the prior biennium, that was 272,000. And so going back to what we talked about before, that indirect cost model, that pays for all those things like facilities and, legal and all those things. I think that, that's the increase for the Sandy Library.
For example, $34,000 of that amount is going to the facilities maintenance department, so paying for the maintenance and upkeep of the building. Paying their contribution towards that new person in facilities. The remaining increases, applied across the board with IT and HR and finance and allocated, I don't want to say evenly because it fluctuates based on FTE and operating budget, but that methodology applying to all the other direct departments that, their budgets increase, so everyone else pays a little bit more into those indirect service costs because those costs went up. And then that newly created Department of Facilities.
When you say district funding, can you just re-educate me real fast what that means?
The Clackamas County voters voted a library district, so every taxpayer pays 39 cents per thousand of assessed value to the county, and then the county distributes that money directly to the libraries.
And that's not part of the general fund.
No,
Nope.
so
That's
92% of Sandy Library's funding comes from that district funds.
So but when I'm looking at the budget page here, it just feels like it's coming out of general revenue, which I think is why Counselor Sheldon was asking about the 206 being reduced. So how do I identify that it's coming from district funds and not general revenue funds?
So if you look on,
They're pooled.
if you look on page 36,
Third item down. 2 million.
yeah, so the very right-hand column, budget 25-27 proposed, you'll see the district funding for $2.8 million. And then at the very bottom, if you sum those two general fund numbers together, $206,000. So a pretty small percentage of the library's budget is from general funds.
I see that
Sure.
thing. One follow-up, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
And Tyler, you kept mentioning 96,000, then you got this, right below that's the 51,000 donations, which isn't guaranteed. But then there's 54,000 in Hoodland that we're not talking about yet. That is still for the same acquisition, right? For the Mobile. So in reality, we're collecting 51 on top of 150. So we're spending 99, not a, that's a bigger portion, not a smaller portion when you put the two together.
Yeah, point taken. I think, the Hoodland Library is a little bit different in the sense that it doesn't get any general revenue. It's 100% supported just by district funds. I think at least the takeaway from staff's perspective, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sarah or Tyler, there was an interest in making sure that Hoodland paid their fair share, whatever, fair share meant. So this represents Hoodland paying, remind me, 1/5, about 20%, which is sort of,
It's based on the exact population numbers actually for Hoodland and in the Sandy service area and the Hoodland service area. So about 1/5 of the population is Hoodland service area.
How many people from the Hoodland do you think actually use the Sandy Library for picking up their books because theirs is closed by the time they get home from work?
A good portion.
But
Sure.
the other thing that
Question.
kind of comes into play, and I'll just, kind of share this because I've kind of really gotten down into the weeds on all this, but basically the $2.78 million dollars that the district gives from the county, it's a 2.824, excuse me, 2.824,700 is a district allocation from Clackamas County. And that represents our 39 cents per thousand that everybody in this district pays. Then, and that's in the Sandy Hoodland district, in the Sandy district. And so, but what happens is how much of that, the people outside the city of Sandy, we get money about $50 per person. But the city residents only get about $31 per person. So the city residents are already kind of getting less. And I just got appointed to a task force tomorrow to kind of help clarify that. And my intent, let me just preface everything this with, I want us to have really healthy, financially solid libraries. I want more books. I want more digital books. I want more programs. I want all that stuff. And so I'm not trying to kind of cut anything here. I'm trying to kind of say, I am all about, grants, because that gives you more money for your maintenance and operations. And and what I see, what this seems to be telling me is that when we can, spend two budgets or whatever, spending that much money on a capital investment, that seems like, we don't like that really probably put a big hole in our programs, I would think, because we were spending a lot more before. And so I am concerned about what the impacts to our programs and other things were. I am really all about getting more grants. There's Jupiter, there's Ford Foundation, there's all these other things that give out money for this kind of thing. And it's such a white hat project to get funded. So I am, a little disappointed that we're only going after 51,000. And then the final thing is that the Hoodland Library, all the money for Hoodland goes to Hoodland. Well, guess where probably half the books for those people get picked up at? Our library, because by the time they get up there, it's closed. So we don't charge Hoodland for all the services we provide at this library. And that's okay, but it is kind of
I pick up books in West Lynn, but bottom line for tonight is we're not gonna change the library budget tonight. That the purview,
Beg to differ.
we're not gonna change it right now. Are we gonna change it right now?
I
Is that the
would-
plan?
I still have an open question.
Okay.
and comment that I.
Go ahead,
Before we wrap
because we
this.
spent 30 minutes on this one item.
I understand.
As many as like
So
10 items.
I made a point earlier that I didn't feel like the statements were being completely correct in terms of how the money was being stated. And I believe that because this is not a special, like a sewer fund or something that only has limited uses, this money is all pooled and all goes out from the same. It all comes together as revenue, then it goes out as expenses. Is that correct? You're not writing a check against a specific income, are you?
The library district funds that we receive can only be used for library district services. So the amount of discretionary spending the library has is tied to a very small amount of
Fair.
general revenue that it
So
gets.
when we make a statement that any of the funds that are coming in could be used to pay for the bookmobile, correct?
The county clarified that yes, you can use it for capital outlay.
So it's effectively pulled. So that's number one I want to say is that when we say, well, it's coming from this or that, it's a shell game. It's all coming in, it's all going out. What it means to us is that in the end of the day, it's 206,000 coming from the general fund to support the library operations as budgeted, which translates to about just under $16 per every man, woman, and child in Sandy to pay that people outside of the city aren't paying. And if you factor the bookmobile into it, it's $27. Because that's kind of effectively in this biennium, so we just kind of considered it. It's $27 per person that the outside people aren't paying it. And I've been one to advocate all along. I think we should not use general funds to supplement the library. And I continue to maintain that it needs to be self-funding. The county needs to pay for it's a district. It needs to be self-supporting. You can't count on the city to pick up the slack.
The county certainly does. I think we're probably one of the lowest contributors in Clackamas County to the library out of the general fund. I mean, many other cities are contributing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars every biennium to their library. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. That's not the point I'm trying to make. I'm just, trying to paint the picture that the county is not.
I would question the geography of the size of those cities relative to the service
A
area.
lot of cities get more because their tax base is higher. They get more per citizen.
Yes, yeah.
Westland gets $81 per citizen, whereas we're getting they get $50 more per citizen because their houses are worth more than.
Hopefully we'll get that passed,
But
adjusted at least.
We're working on that.
there's inequities all over the place.
It seems to me that the city really, as a citizen, okay, I'm speaking as a citizen, I see the library as a crucial piece of, just like police, just like streets, just like whatever parks that you have in this city, and it is crucial that we do that. So whether or not we pay $27 or $37 or $80 a person, we need a city library that is funded, library that is funded partially with the district funds and partially with the city funds. And if we can, any grants. So it seems to me that everybody is in violent agreement that we want to fund this thing. City council has decided that you want this. Mobile.
That's what I'm saying is I'm not. Well,
So-
mobile, we did vote on that. Yes, the mobile, we decided we wanted.
Everybody, I think, maybe not everybody, but it seems like we have a lot of desire to do that.
150,000.
So it seems to me that if we have a disagreement about how this money is to be allocated towards funding this mobile bookmobile, call it that, it seems to me we ought to be able to say that that's how we want the library staff to fund it that way. So I'm a little confused about how that's already being said. We have somebody saying, well, build more grant money into it. And other people are saying, well, we can't depend on that grant money, so how are we gonna fund this thing? It seems to me that we aren't.
Maybe we did it backwards. Maybe we should have seen what the library had to bring in fund wise. And the deficit, if the city council was willing to fund that. Instead of all the questionables, the grants, the district. I know some things we can't wait on, but. We have $180,000, the bookmobile's 320, come to the city and say, here's what we need to get this done. Is this a possibility from the general fund? To fund our libraries, instead of going at it, give a chunk of money, hope that it all falls into place and. it's not asked of us more when that doesn't work out, because grants are not guaranteed.
To be clear, there is no additional general fund money being allocated specifically for the shortfall of expected grant revenue and the remaining cost. The general revenue allocation has been held consistent from the prior biennium to the proposed biennium. And you can see that on page 36, the final three line items of that table specifically reflect the $150,000 towards the vehicle in the biennium 23-25 budget. And then the two following line items were the support that the city provides for operations and debt. And those numbers are in total exactly the same, $40 difference because of principal and interest and the way that things pay out on the debt payment. But
So what happens if it doesn't get funded beyond what it needs to be? Is the 150,000 that the city paid just out, or do we wait 5 years?
we funded the remaining portion based on this.
They're
proposed
funding it through the
budget.
district.
Yeah, so I mean,
Okay.
there's no. The vehicle, the first check has been cut, the vehicle is in production, we can get it as early as
This fall?
this fall. We have a budget that allocates enough funding from the district to pay for the remaining amount, split equally or split appropriately between the Sandy service area and the Hoodland service area. If we're fortunate enough to get additional grant funding, we will obviously reflect the additional revenue in our budget, which would trickle down to either a higher contingency or a larger beginning balance rolling into the next biennium.
Or buy more STEM kits.
Buy
for
more
the
STEM kits,
mobile
more
library.
programming.
Yeah.
Why don't you reverse
We could
it?
do more with it.
Yeah, I
What's that?
understand.
Pay back the general
Reverse
fund.
it. Set a budget low with the expectation you're gonna fund the whole thing, which is what was promised,
Mhm.
and if it doesn't work out, come see us.
I mean, that's,
The city's already spent 150,000 on it. You have to get it to where it can be used, or you've wasted 150. Because I'm assuming it can go into
Yeah,
production
but
possibly by this fall, but when it gets here, it still needs to
We're,
be
we're not
outfitted on
spending
the
the money.
inside.
It's not
No,
coming.
That's how we'll get it.
Come all
It's coming from
fully
district
outfitted.
funding.
Fully outfitted.
So if it is, that's what he's telling us. If we play the whole backwards,
Yeah.
right? If that bus is paid for by district funding, if it doesn't, if you receive all the grants and it's 150,000 in donations you get, let's just say hypothetically, then you're gonna have $150,000 extra from district funding to utilize on some other library expense. It's not coming from general fund contingency line that the city council is gonna have to approve, is what I'm
So
saying.
my point is that even though Tyler's correct, those numbers have been the same. The direction I thought was to drive those numbers down to be self-supporting. Hoodland, we don't pay anything towards the Hoodland building. Right?
rightfully so, because it's not within city limits, it's
Oh.
not our building, it's not our service area, it's
But
a
so we're
completely.
giving them a building, but then we have these other charges around it. So I mean, how much are we supposed to be given?
Well, it's a reduction too, because it's 206 again.
So
I mean,
those, yeah, and
from 356 down to 206, so.
Yeah.
I'm-
That $356 reflects the $150,000 contribution towards the initial purchase price of the vehicle.
Oh, so it goes from 200
it's
to
not an actual reduction
206.
is the key. So the thing is, it's a shell game. In the, whether you say the money is coming from the city or not coming from, it doesn't really matter
Don.
because it's just money. You're right,
We're
I'm
now
sorry.
at, we're now at 850. And you had said, when I said we're not gonna change it tonight, you have a proposal to change it tonight, or we're gonna leave it where it is, and the council can address that at the
We're
time
gonna
of either
discuss
there's a
it
shortfall
when
in
we
the
all-
budget.
Are we gonna discuss when we all come back together, all the changes we want to make? That's probably a more appropriate time.
You could do that then,
Yeah, that's probably more
if
appropriate.
Chair recognizes
Just
you.
put that on your list of things to talk about during the.
Yeah, because we've gotten through 2 items in 50 minutes, where we got through
And
10
my
in the
apologies.
first.
And
2 hours.
And I'm gonna say the last word on it, the whole thing. And my point is that like, there is no change in like the amount of audiobooks that we're gonna have or more books or anything like that. And so that was kind of where it is an opportunity lost for all of us that do read all those books. And so that's kind of where I'm
Well, there's a drop in general fund in this current year from the previous biennium.
right. Oh, yeah, I
Of
know.
150.
Oh, yeah.
No, there's
Yeah.
not though. That's
No.
that
I'm not,
150 is
I'm not
the-
in agreement totally with Don, but I'm just,
Yeah.
But that's
supportive
the-
of funding for programs and books
Just
and
agree to
stuff like that.
disagree and move on to the next.
I just want, I need to clarify that though.
Clarity, right?
Let's be very clear, that $150,000 that the last budget we passed to
Mhm.
account for the bookmobile is the increase that you see from last year to this year.
And the decrease.
So
The
it
decrease.
is, you know, it was the increase last year.
Yeah. and the
From
decrease
this
is
year.
now
carryover.
decreased
We are
this
not,
year.
we are not, it's not carryover. That is
Right.
out of our contingency last year. We gave that to the library to buy the bookmobile.
That's why last year was 350 and this
That's
year's
why last year, I just
206.
want to be really clear
Yeah.
about that we're not cutting the library or anything like that. Because we're not doing.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah. Because it was added mid-year, it's kind of confusing. But
It was added at the budget cycle. Last
2 years
budget,
ago.
last budget, yes,
Last
when we had that pot of money, that is
oh,
when
that's
we
right.
all
that's
voted
when
to.
we voted to
book
take
book.
that pot of
Yes,
money.
That's why I
That was
want to
part
be,
of the 467 from
Yes.
the last budget
Yes.
cycle.
Which was
That's why I wanna be really clear
959.
about
Yeah,
And
it was
Very
huge.
minor final
Yeah.
comment on the, or maybe not final, but the proposal that we had 2 years ago, there was a very different cost of what that outreach vehicle was supposed to be.
Right.
And then the manufacturer discontinued that vehicle. We went through some significant supply chain issues and cost of vehicles exponentially went up. The next best model that met the needs of our community is the model that has been presented. Our concerns were delaying any longer was going to continue to increase that cost of the
Any of the parts
vehicle.
are coming from China, we're in trouble.
And so, you know, that's why we brought it back to the council to say, hey, we got this shortfall, right? We had the money to pay for the vehicle acquisition, but we're gonna have additional upfitting costs. And the decision was made to move forward with the purchase. I
By a
don't
vote
think
of
there's
council.
any way possible to reverse action on that purchase now. We've cut a check, we've signed an agreement. So there's another forgive me, I don't have the total in front of me, 160,000, well, remaining is
My point.
160.
Beating it
That
to
still
the
needs to be contributed towards the acquisition of that vehicle. And that is what the budget represents.
coming from district funds.
And I will just add the final word.
No.
that We are the,
No more
we
final
are,
words.
no, I'm, no,
We're in the weeds.
we are the,
Let's order the chair.
no, let me
Go
just say.
ahead.
We are the financial overseers of the Sandy Library District and the Hoodland Library District. Okay, so it's not like there's some other, it's not like the county's in charge of that district budget. We are, okay?
Correct.
That's all I'll say.
And that was voted on and approved and the vehicle's been ordered. So let's move on to page 67, the Hoodland Library.
So
Please.
not the final word.
That is the final word because we're going to the Hoodland one and hopefully it won't drag into whatever. Page
Take us away,
67.
Tyler.
I'm gonna get stricter.
The Hoodland service area extends from Wildcat Creek Road to the county boundary near the government camp and houses over 5,700 unincorporated Clackamas County residents. The Hoodland Library resides in rented space of 1,909 square feet and will be open this coming year 38 hours per week. So looking at the budget, no changes to the FTE total. Intergovernmental revenue accounts for revenue from the Clackamas County Library District with district revenue for the same service area. Capital outlay of 60,500 of that 54,000 is for the aforementioned bookmobile. And the last thing is Hoodland Library pays into the city indirect service revenue model, and that amount is going from 69,000 to 81,000. Contingency is about 23,000. And as mentioned earlier, one last thing I'll add is that there's no general fund allocation for Hoodland.
Rich,
just a quick question, why how do this FTE stay the same, but between salary, insurance, PERS and all of that, it's dropped about, I mean, it's not a bad thing, but it's dropped about 30,000.
We had a longtime staff member retire in the last budget cycle and hired new staff in. So they probably there's a difference in insurance, they're not taking the insurance. And they are getting paid a lower wage because they're on the first step of the scale rather than the top of the scale.
Hire more like that.
Yeah.
Tyler, the contingency on Hoodland Library, is that coming from district or from government?
That's
all
from
district.
district revenue. Yep.
But why is it 15%?
I'm sorry, what do you mean?
Well, 120,840 is 15% of $126,390. I'm just curious.
That $120,000 is the beginning balance, so just unused district revenue from the current biennium that's rolling forward into the next biennium.
I'm just curious why it was so high.
Why it's so high?
Yeah. And then,
Yeah,
The staff is extremely frugal. They almost never ask for any supplies, anything, because they're used to being very frugal. They've been that way for a long time. So getting them to express their need for even Post-it notes is sometimes difficult. So.
and part of that is attributed to your lower cost employee that you now have.
Right.
Compared to have with the salary.
Yes, yeah. But we also, the retirement was a lot of that money saved as well. But we were also hoping to make sure we had enough in the Hoodland budget to pay for their remainder of the mobile library, so. Sort of weighing it out.
Any other questions? We'll move on to recreation, page 45.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.
Recreation, so the recreation department provides comprehensive recreation programs and special events for the people of Sandy. The department works to keep programs affordable so all community members can access opportunities regardless of their socioeconomic status. The projected beginning balance for recreation is $126,000. This proposed budget includes $803,000 in general revenue, which is an $83,000 increase from the prior biennium. Fines, fees, and assessments budget is increased due to additional program participation and slight increase in program fees. No additional department FTE and personnel costs are increased about $81,000 due to cost escalations and COLAs. Materials and services is increased along with rising fee revenue to support those programs. So the idea is that those programs are cost recovering, and so is the you get more participants and more revenue. It takes more to support those programs. And then contingency for recreation is set at $14,000.
What's an example of the recreation fees contracted? There's a significant drop in that, but I just was curious, what is that?
Okay.
Come on up, Rochelle.
Here I come. I can't wait. Here we go. So contracted fees, we're talking under revenue.
Yeah,
Or
43610,
40.
436-101.
So that includes any of our like contracted fees. So we hold contracted classes like yoga, for example. So that would be any of those increases of contracts that we have, like 80-20 split.
So he just said that we have an increased participation in our programs, but we're reducing the budget in that.
Let's see, I'm looking at.
That's money coming in, right?
Yeah, that's money coming in.
So why are we getting $20,000 less? Are you
Less.
expecting less participation or?
There is,
So keep in mind that 23, I'm gonna jump in here, Rochelle,
Yeah.
sorry. The 23-25 column was our budget. This was the first year, our first biennium that we had broken out, contracted versus in-house. We had estimated 60. We're anticipating closer to 40,000 being the actual. So the biennium 25-27, we're just aligning with our current biennium actuals.
Well, that makes-
More in line with existing program
So you
participation.
budgeted 60, but you.
Which is
only
why
spent
the
about
youth-
40.
We're only brought in
Bringing
about
in
40.
almost twice as much.
Right, which is why the basketball fees
Yeah.
are double because
Yeah.
I got it. Well, that all makes sense. Perfect. And then why about the event and community sponsorship? It's showing a reduction as well. And it sounded like you were saying more people were getting involved. So I didn't know why we were estimating less revenue.
so same thing, but we're projecting year in 68 and for 2025, 60,000. But what we're doing is siphoning up 28,000 that we're going to fundraise for Winterfest that will go into the parks revenue line item.
To help
So
offset
where's the
some of the
28,000?
different budget, parks
Parks and-
budget.
Oh,
Parks
got
and
it,
Recs.
sorry.
Yep.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Question in the statement. So the first question is, concert revenue, 21-23 is 23,200, and then it went down to 2,000. What happened to that money?
Okay, I'm definitely trying to keep up with where you guys are looking here. Concert revenue, 601,
Let me know if you want me to jump in.
do you know what the answer? Oh, girl.
I know. So part of this is due to sponsorships, event and community sponsorships. You'll see for the first two biennium that are reflected here in the actuals, there was no revenue there. It wasn't because we didn't have revenue and sponsorships, it was because we didn't track it separately. When Rochelle came on board, and when we built the 23-25 budget, we broke out sponsorships and revenue as a separate line item, which had previously been reported in other areas, like the sponsorship for concerts went to concert revenue instead of just the proceeds of sales of miscellaneous things at the concert. So, yeah.
The other thing I'd just like to note, out of everything I see, everything seems to go up and cost more. I just want to, if you look at your performance measures, this is the first time that your FTEs have went down, but your events have went up. So I just wanted to applaud that from whoever that's due to. Thank you.
They do a very good job with not a lot of bodies. And a lot of requests from our governing body to do more and offer more, and Rochelle and her team step up every day to make sure that we're doing that.
One last comment, is $30,000 really enough for the fireworks display?
Yes, because we get a quote for it and then we know what the increases are going to be. And so that would
For the
be,
year ahead?
but those costs have increased annually every
Right,
year.
that's
And
what
I
I thought.
anticipate that will continue. Yeah.
Anything else? Thank you. Senior services. No, page 48.
Just sit
Just
there,
page.
Yeah. pretend you're mine for a second.
The Senior Services Department is a centralized location for providing information, resources, nutrition, transportation, social services, and recreation opportunities for adults 60 years and that are residing within the Oregon Trail School District. The department is facing some fiscal budget sustainability challenges. As Tyler mentioned in his budget method, there are some departments that are facing some of these sustainability issues. And I just wanted to flag that this is one of those departments, and staff are going to be spending 25, 27 taking a look at how we can make this department more sustainable. So one of the big reasons for that is grant funding is about $100,000 less than prior biennium. And so the general fund allocation for 25, 27 was increased by 115,000 to 850,000. The beginning balance in 23, 25 was 355,000. In this budget for 25, 27, it's 245,000. And even with the additional general revenue allocation, there's only a projected ending balance of $13,000.
I'm having trouble hearing you. I'm sorry, Tyler, if you can talk a little more.
Yeah, sorry. So the beginning balance for 23, 25 was $355,000. And so for this budget, it's $245,000. And then the contingency for this biennium was $13,000. So you've seen essentially a burn of those funds to continue to provide these services. And so this department is going to continue to be able to provide continuity of services over the next biennium by spending down those reserves. But like I said, we'll need to take action in 25, 27 to have a plan moving forward for 27, 29 to make the budget more sustainable.
Large drop in grants.
Absolutely. There's $100,000 decrease in grants from.
Yeah. That's really
With
generated.
Are we
Yes,
having to make it up
there's
as general
there's also a
revenue?
reason why, because of the trend that we, yeah.
I'm sorry, Mayor, what was?
Oh, I just, yeah, I mean, we're increasing the general revenue by over $100,000. Is that because the drop in grants?
I mean, well, do you want to answer that? I'm sorry.
It's just to offset some of that lost grant revenue and keep continuity of services for this biennium. So with that additional general revenue allocation that we're able to allocate, we're able to keep those services. The issue is the bigger thing offsetting some of those use of funds is beginning balance. And so once that beginning balance isn't available, like it won't be in the following biennium, it would require a much larger general fund allocation to offset that, and it would probably be pretty challenging to do that.
Pretty big increase in the salaries and PERS and all that stuff. Is that consistent with everybody else? I mean, everything else is going down in costs, and, you know, vehicle repair and maintenance and all that. And I guess my point about all this is that, you know, with all these reductions in Meals on Wheels and things like that, we're planning to plug the hole so that they don't see any reduction in services, which is an admirable, you know, effort on our part to keep seniors fed. But when there's no consequences, you know, sometimes it's helpful to have some consequences for, you know,
Well,
for them to kind of call up their representatives and, you know, complain that, you know, maybe they're missing a meal or something like that. So I don't want seniors to miss meals or anything, but.
we just gotta make sure that people know that we're the ones filling the gap. Jan, you have?
Yeah, I know some cities actually have positions for grant writers, both as consultants and the staff person. And looking at several of the different divisions, you can see that there's a lot of unexpected grant revenue. Maybe we should look more into something like that in the future to get some help in that area.
Yeah, great point. There was a council goal to explore or look into, I can't remember the correct terminology, the hiring of a grant writer. That was not something that's built into this budget, largely due to the cost of, you know, the ongoing cost of a person to specialize in grant writing. Several of, you know, especially in this department, the loss or the decrease in grant revenue is twofold. One, part of the senior services, the transportation focused senior services have been relocated from this budget into our transit department. And Andy's department is seeing the grant revenue for those services through Clackamas County.
So that programs dash transportation going from 156,000 to 0 is what you're talking about
Yeah,
there?
exactly.
Okay, thank you.
But in part, you know, there is federal grants will continue to decrease, and Rochelle and her team have heard that from representatives in Clackamas County that the grant funding is drying up. And so, you know, I think that's one of those areas where we'll explore other grant opportunities, but as Tyler mentioned, really getting down to the nuts and bolts of what's provided, how it's provided, who provides it.
Who it's provided to.
And who it's provided to. 100%. You know, our intent was not to reduce services anywhere, and we haven't in any part of this budget document. There's no reduction in services. And really laying the groundwork for investing a substantial amount of time with the council going forward on policy discussions around services and programs and potential revenue sources and right, a long, lengthy, robust conversation around departments just like this to figure out, you know, are we the right service provider? If we're not, who is? If we are, great. Are we providing the service to the correct demographic or the correct geographical region or, right? I mean, that list goes on, and that's what we'll be spending the next 2 years working on.
One thing to the mayor's point, I think that, you know, personnel costs are certainly increasing just with, you know, normal escalations and COLAs and, you know, insurance and benefits and all those things cost more. You mentioned that in the context of some of the other items decreasing. Really what that's a reflection of is, you know, the attempts to belt tighten as much as possible with some of those other expense categories to both, you know, continue to offer those services and keep, you know, the FTE and you know, minimize the additional general revenue ask. That's why you're seeing a lot of those other costs go down.
So I've asked this one before. All right, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I really do want to see a better way of accounting for who we're serving in and out of the city, like we did with the library a few years ago. From an accounting perspective, it's just some data I think we need, especially if we're comprehending, you know, cutting programs and understand or supplementing, you know, that's a big supplement, you know, from the general fund today. 750 already going to 850 this new biennium. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
I want to understand how many people are being served from that and those demographics of where they live. And I don't know that I want to wait until 2 years of looking at it when we've dug ourselves in a bigger hole. I think if there's some data that can be brought back to us to understand that in the short term, not a full comprehensive report, but at least some data on that, I think that would be helpful.
We can tell you the in-city, out-of-city demographic right now. We have that data. John, if you want to come up a little closer, so at least the microphone can pick up your voice.
You know, I was gonna ask.
Oh, yeah.
we have-
And I mean, this is part of our, you know, we're not waiting 2 years to have the conversation, right? It's just. This isn't the
Before that
policy
starts,
decision.
before
this is
John
the
jumps into it,
funding the budget.
I have to say that the city of Sandy is a workhorse in this part of the county. And if you don't get people from the city of Sandy and the population that it represents involved in doing something, you're just not gonna get it with that. The other thing is that the city of Sandy has to go after the county in some of these things. When you're after services that happen outside of our boundary, it legally isn't our authority to spend that money on things that do not happen within the city. So there's two things there. One is that if we don't get involved in it, it's probably not gonna happen very much. And secondly is we gotta get the county to remember that this is the part of the county that actually exists in Clackamas, as well as Lake Oswego, Oak Creek, Creek, I think it is, and all the other places that have so much more population than we do. So, sorry about that, John.
I'll keep that in mind as a member of the county budget committee.
There you go. Excellent. Go after it.
Thank you.
I could get you a full list of all the services and where they fall in our boundary line pretty easily, but our heavy lift for those senior services, our Meals on Wheels program and the case management that goes with those Meals on Wheels clients. And currently, right now, we have about 78 clients on our Meals on Wheels, and it's about 65% of those clients are outside of city limits.
Yeah.
78%, so
65-35.
78 clients.
78 clients right now, but those numbers fluctuate. We might get 7 new people that sign up in the next 2 weeks, and we might get 5
And the
people
outside
that leave.
percentage was one more time.
65% outside of city boundaries.
You're talking about people that's their way of living. We're like pretty important stuff.
I know.
If the county doesn't get involved in some stuff.
Right, and I'm not saying we shouldn't be altruistic and maybe do it even as a city, but I want to understand the financial impact and make sure the cities understands what we're doing.
But the county needs to do it too.
Not the city,
They know it.
but citizens, you know, that everybody understands, look, this is something we want to invest in, great.
And that's one of the things that Tyler had mentioned earlier on too, is we're identifying the of those. And in fact, when I first started and think, you know, Tyler stepping up, but we did negotiate and how the district rate for some of those Meals on Wheels, understanding that we didn't want to subsidize out of the city limits or out of that region at a higher rate. And so they did need us with adjusting that. That is something that will continue to happen. And again, identifying based on our cost recovery model and sustainability model, how do we lower our expenses, increase our revenue? And we've even talked internally as a team, you know, going back to the 3 legs of the stool, we really are going to have to lean on fundraising and donations for Meals on Wheels. And so that's something we're identifying too, in order to keep these services for, you know, really important services for seniors. So
I would love to see some of, if there's people who are able to travel to go testify at those budget committees at the county level to advocate for more funding.
is the Meals on Wheels funding source from them in the nutrition program, or is that something different?
What, I couldn't hear, what was that?
Is the
Funding
Meals
source
on
of the
Wheels
county.
program from the county funded by the nutrition program at 80,000?
That's it's the part of the federal grant revenue line item.
Oh, okay.
The
So
$80,000 in grant, or the $80,000 in nutrition program revenue is
That's
donations
donations
that
and
come in
fundraising
for the
to help
program.
offset.
Do we have an idea of how much Meals on Wheels costs us?
We
Yes,
do,
yeah.
yeah.
How much is that?
Well, what's nice, if you're just talking direct cost of the meal, it doesn't cost us anything if it's just direct cost of food product. Our reimbursement rate's really low because of that. They put in an algorithm at a time, would be taking staff time, center expenditures like your energy and stuff like that. It's 1268. or
Yeah, I was gonna say
$30 a meal.
1282, so
Yeah.
we're 12 something. Per meal.
What's the total program cost is what I'm.
Oh, the total program cost.
For
Well,
that
We
specific
have that
program.
map.
Because it's not in here.
It was, yeah, we do, it was 20,
Yeah, so we have 12,000 meals a year.
it's 12 to 15.
13,000,
Yeah.
13,000 according to your number.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then it's
Senior meals served, yeah, 13,000.
156,000 per year.
They'll be served. Do they have to warm them?
Yeah, they have to warm them themselves, so these are served frozen.
So just curious of that price, if we looked at an outsourcing arrangement.
that is a conversation that we've had. And is that
My
something that
factor meals
nonprofit could
cost me
take over?
just about that.
Yeah. There's some really neat case studies out there that use that as an example of potentially working with nonprofits that help provide Meals on Wheels services. So yes, it's something we're gonna be looking at sooner rather than later.
Probably be helpful to have a workshop at some point, yeah, maybe this summer, fall, about that. I
Jeremy
do have a
just
question.
whispered to me, this is a deja vu conversation from 20 years. ago.
Yes, exactly.
This is not, we're not inventing anything new here because we had this same conversation as a council more than 20 years ago.
I am
They're
curious.
all frozen.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
They're all frozen meals because Hoodland does fresh meals on Mondays and Tuesdays.
Ooh.
And they're, I suppose, I just talked to someone today, they're delicious. Like Busy Bee Catering does their Mondays and
Oh,
Tuesdays.
man.
Whoa.
Yeah,
I mean, that's part of what we're gonna explore is,
yeah.
is there a better service provider for half the time, all the time, part of the time? Tuesdays and Wednesdays, or maybe Wednesdays and Thursdays if Busy Bee's doing Monday,
Right.
Tuesday up there. Or is there a better, an organization that's better suited to do this incredibly important work that isn't the city? And those are all things that we're gonna continue to explore. Is there a nonprofit that can do it better?
Do they do
Cheaper.
meals in the facility anymore?
So we have an update on that. So we actually just updated our kitchen, so it meets all the safety standards, so we can host congregate meals again.
Because that was, I mean, as a council before, we thought that was a key part of it for the socialization of the elderly. To not just be in their homes heating up their frozen meal in their microwave, they could actually go down there and have conversations with some people.
It isn't that a big part of the Meals on Wheels program. I mean, food's obviously the big part, but you mentioned, the case study or the case working part of it, that sort of thing, and actually checking in on them and connecting them with other services where if you mail them a factor meal, once a week, you're not getting that portion of the program, right?
Right.
Is there any rationale for why the senior program gets all the building rent, 50,000?
Because I think it was correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was originally a senior center, and so you rented out the senior center, and so the rentals fed to the community/senior center.
Basically.
Community center.
Okay.
Make a note about that.
I mean, that's another one of
I'm not
those, you know, you
sure.
rob Peter to pay Paul, right? 'Cause if you
Yeah, I
take half
know,
of
it's
that,
all
put it
about
somewhere
a
else,
thing,
it's
but-
It's
gonna-
an umbrella budget.
Yeah.
I think we're gonna stay there because we're gonna move on to Parks and Trails, page
I
51.
would trade with you on
The Parks Department maintains and makes minor improvements to the city's parks, open spaces, public spaces, and public buildings. These activities are funded primarily out of the general fund. And so some of the big projects that are gonna be going on between 25, 27, will be discussed more the Parks capital budget next meeting. But these projects are constructing Deer Point Park, renovating Mining Park for better accessibility and use for community events, restoring sections of the Tickle Creek Trail, and continuing to expand Winterfest. So fines, fees, and assessments includes revenue from both the rental property and Bornstead Park, and fees to reserve various facilities within these parks. Transfer from non-departmental is to fund Winterfest improvements. Tyler talked about that earlier, that $50,000. And that's one of the council goals. General fund allocation is 1.5 and increased by 100,000 over the prior biennium. Down to uses, personnel costs increased modestly. This is mostly due to just COLAs and cost escalations. Materials and services increased overall. Notable items were the Winterfest expansion. There was a council goal at looking at making the Parks Department more financially sustainable by changing the city practice of billing ourselves for utilities and splash pad. City staff did an informal survey of some of the surrounding jurisdictions, and many of them don't charge their departments. This proposed budget includes $100,000 savings to the Parks Department for the biennium for not charging ourselves for the splash pad or for parks irrigation. So again, those are properties kind of for the public good. And then the budget contingency is $49,000.
What was the $100,000 equipment last year?
That included, and correct me if I'm wrong, the cameras were wrapped into that. And then we purchased a mower, right? Wow. I'm sorry, I just messed with my memory. That was.
If your staffing goes up by 0.37, wouldn't your insurance and benefits go up?
Not always. So similar response to earlier, we budget based on the actual employees in the
Somebody may or may
job,
not
so,
have chosen the benefit.
yep, there's some sort of.
Well, and also,
informative
aren't
change.
you, so by having the facilities person, the folks in the Parks Department that were doing facilities will now be in the parks. So that's really, it's not like new people. It's just,
Their FTEs a lot of.
right.
Yeah. I think that's-
Thanks. Ask a question about the benefits, and it goes along, and it's kind of been bothering me. If the person were to get married or have a kid or decide to change their benefits, that really shift your whole benefits package if you're going right to that employee. Should you not budget for pretty much a middle tier in between, like the average higher? Because I just know my own staff, get married, have kids, people change their insurance if they want. And you can get yourself in a little trouble not having budgeted enough.
Yeah, we've been fortunate that in instances where benefit level coverage has changed, it's not 10 employees in any given year, it's 1 or 2. And most of the time they're allocated among several different departments, so it's an easy thing to absorb within those contingency dollars. So it hasn't presented an issue. And because it hasn't presented an issue, potentially overinflating that line and then not allocating revenue where it is needed most, is my concern, not being able to ensure that the police get the funding they need, or, port or whatever other general service department gets their funding they need, because we've overinflated the potential.
Or yeah,
But again, we don't have a track record of that per department. Yeah, I mean, it's been very few and far between where those changes have had any impact on the department's operations.
I think with a bigger employee number, you're able to manage that better than just one employee. They change it shifts that budget.
Yeah.
Or if that person left and someone new came in during that line.
I'm on page
Chair, real quick.
53.
Real quick.
Go ahead.
Sorry. What is there's improvements that went from 100,000
Yeah.
to 45,000? And then sliding further down, why did the indirect costs go from 92,000 to 149 for this?
Well, to answer your first question, improvements, so what we did is we actually took and added a Winterfest line item.
Okay,
And so we took and split that in 2.
so the decrease is the Winterfest
Correct.
money, okay.
And then I'm sorry, your second question?
The contingent, or I'm sorry, the indirect support cost, why so substantial increase?
Sure, I mean, that increase is, you've seen quite a few departments that received, quite a significant increase, and this is one of those departments, again, for the paying in the facilities maintenance, paying into legal, paying in for all those things.
The one thing I would add, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
We base, the current year's and the proposed budget's indirect cost allocation is based on the prior biennium's FTE and operating budget. And you can see that the operating budget for parks went up substantially from biennium 21-23 to 23-25. And so that's also driving that indirect cost allocation in the current biennium. And they increased FTE and a modest increase in the FTE, so the FTE, yep. Thank you for it.
And I did kind of identify this in the indirect cost thing, but you have a bunch of money in the facilities. Indirect cost. And I think there's some double dip in there, because most of those facilities are stuff that's getting already repaired by your staff. And so anyway, I have a note to look at that. But the thing that does kind of concern me, going kind of bouncing off of what Rich said, Councilor Sheldon said was, you do have, I guess if you include the $50,000 for Winterfest improvements to the 45, you got 95,000, but the repairs and maintenance for the park, here we have a huge new park and it's going from 95 to 90,000. So I'm a little bit concerned about, with new parks that we're getting in the next, that we've got with Cedar Park and Deer Point, that we might want to consider, increasing repairs and maintenance rather than decreasing it. So that might be something to kind of talk about it at the end of the, when we get to that final negotiations.
Chair, I have a question. About a year ago, I was talking to PGD's community involvement folks, and they are very involved in other cities about investing in the grant writing and grant providing for lots of different activities. Seems to me that we've talked about the Winterfest now a couple times. Haven't seen much in the contribution column from PGD. Did a chance to touch base with those folks, and I don't want to get into the details of any means, but it seemed like they were really very interested in getting involved. But
Yeah.
we don't on that.
The short answer is yes, and if we want to talk a little bit further detail, John has actually been the one running with that communication and conversation with PGE on how to get them involved and tap in some of those grants, and then also some assistance with connectivity or electricity in downtown.
So they're ready to jump into that, help the Winterfest.
We're hoping that progresses that way. Okay.
Yeah, I'm also meeting with the President PG in May, on May 23rd, and
Yeah.
going to bring that topic up. Great.
A lot of money that they are involved in, here getting from our constituents. Yeah. Citizens, sorry, I don't have constituents anymore.
Hey.
Question. You mentioned we're not paying ourselves for utility fee or utilities. Essentially, those still cost us money. Is this just shifting to the rate there? Yeah.
It would, yeah.
I don't know. It seems like when fees are going up quite a bit already, it seems. I realize it's the exact same person paying the exact same amount probably in the long run, but the city being like, utilities are too expensive, let's just not pay them anymore. I don't know, it just seems like a bad look.
I was the one who kind of pushed for this, I'll tell you, and the reason I did that was because, unlike the ratepayers, they're paying their bill, right? Nobody's paying the bill to have the splash pad on.
Sure.
And so that's $30,000 a year, right there, just for the splash pad, and half of those people probably don't even live in the city limits, but that's another subject. So, and then with the irrigation, it was just a matter of, not only that, but the parks people are the ones who are going out there and repairing the irrigation lines and the splash pad and all that. And so because of those things, where we're already putting a huge amount of money into keeping those facilities up and maintained, paying the water bill, like I said, we're not charging anybody for these services. And so we're not getting the utility fee like the water department is getting for their
Like I said,
houses.
I recognize that regardless of whether as a taxpayer pays the city who pays the utility, or I just pay the utility, it's the same price in the long run. But it just seems like bad optics given the timing of all of our rate increases.
Well, the other option is to reduce the hours at the splash pad and, let the grass go brown at the parks to kind of try to deal with that. And I guess that's, not something I would, the public can kind of make the decision. But go ahead and Tyler, you looked into it with other cities and found.
Well, yeah, so a couple
Yeah.
points. I'm gonna try not to ramble here for a second. First, Tyler Wallace and the utility department did sort of a survey, for lack of a better term, with neighboring communities or similarly sized communities, and found that there's certainly precedent within the state of Oregon for not charging themselves utility fees at all. Our approach is still, we fully intend on still treating every city building like any other ratepayer. So the city hall is still paying our water bill. The library is still paying their water or utility bill. So no proposed changes there. I want to be clear about that. This is just specific to green space that is irrigated, parks that are irrigated, and the splash pad. And while that, saves $100,000 for parks, remember that's water and wastewater charges. And so, for sake of easy discussion, let's assume it's 50-50, right? So $50,000 for water and $50,000 for parks over the course of 2 years is a very, very inconsequential dollar amount to the impact to the water.
Citizens use.
Exactly. It's it's not several $100,000s a year that is now having to be absorbed by ratepayers. So I hear your point totally.
Yeah, recognize all of this, I'm
Yeah.
not saying it's not the smart thing to do. I'm just saying that given the timing of it all, it just creates bad optics.
Or we could charge for the splash pad.
Well, I'm not saying that either.
No, I know, I
That's not
mean,
at all what
I'm just
saying.
kind of making a joke about it that, it is, I understand it, but I'm also frustrated, having been in the parks budget arena for so long to see that much money all of a sudden, going to something that doesn't really benefit anything in parks.
If I can just make one comment too, just so this group knows what we're working on internally. We're actually looking at an irrigation plan and best strategy. So we're not looking at this as like a blank slate. We're actually trying to improve how we are treating and irrigating. And when we irrigate, we're planting drought resistant grass in our future parks. And so just so this group knows that we're also really taking the policy side of it really seriously on that.
That's great.
So,
Great.
But I echo your concerns. I think optics are probably not the best time before.
Okay, before we move on to the next item. If we're done with parks and trails, we have 4 really teeny items left. Like planning, police, building, economic development, and we have 30 minutes, less than 30 minutes left in the meeting. And I'm not saying any one department is to blame. We saved the best for last. But I'm not sure that it does justice to the police department or any of the other 3 that are left to basically hold them to, 7 or 8 minutes apiece so that we can get out of here by 10 o'clock. So I need to see either through raised hands or whatever, do we want to go ahead and plow through the next 4 things and get it done by 10 o'clock? Or if it's gonna take till 10:30, stay here till 10:30, or delay the last 2 and move them forward with the funds on May 5th. Just do 2 in the next 20 minutes and save the other 2 for the next meeting.
Well, I have a suggestion.
2 and 20.
2 and 20.
It's kind of hard to do 2 and 2 because I think Kelly's in charge of all
Well-
3 of the next 3.
No, I don't
He's planning a building, he's not economic development.
I used to oversee that budget, but I don't anymore.
No, he's,
I
we
certainly.
even have one, you guys are in charge of
Yeah, if I
economic
can just
development, right?
provide. Yes.
Yeah.
I think police will
position
probably be a lengthier conversation just because it's a large dollar amount, so
It probably
certainly.
won't be as big as library, but.
Can we do
Certainly.
3 and push police to next week or Monday?
Economic development should not take a lot of time.
We don't have
And-
that position anymore.
And right, so it's contractual services and some other minor things, and building, it does not receive any general revenue. It's self-sustaining, so I would hope that we don't spend too much time nickel and diming a department that doesn't get any
And we have a
benefit from the general
moratorium,
fund.
So,
So really, I think planning is probably the most lengthy of those 3. We could probably get through planning, building, and economic development if we really wanted to, but certainly planning and building, I think we could knock out and
okay,
get
how do we
Kelly's
do
departments
that?
finished up.
Sorry, darling. But, yeah. You probably didn't even need to come next time if you were doing tonight. But
All of them are so thrilled to participate
I know.
and have
I
another
can
night
see
meeting.
the
They will
joy.
be here with bells on.
I will make chocolate chip. So let's just start with the, planning. Right, is that what you said? We
Yep,
knock
that's
out?
perfect.
We can knock that one out. We're not gonna alternative pumpkins in the pot, but.
The planning department is responsible for reviewing development proposals and completing long-range planning projects such as municipal code updates and relevant long-range studies identified by council. The revenue reflects conservative estimates for planning and related fees due to the potential impacts in the moratorium. General revenue allocation is $850,000, which was decreased by $120,000 from the prior biennium as a result of a high beginning balance. Contractual services reflects $100,000 in expenses related to the housing production strategy, zoning map amendments, and other consultant obligations such as the Pleasant Street Master Plan. And indirect support costs increased moderately as a result of the increased attorney fees related to the moratorium and review of code revisions. So as we talked about earlier, attorney fees are one that look back 18 months and specifically allocate those particular attorney fees to that particular department. So yes, it's paid through, but it's paid by the indirect cost model. But the planning department received a larger amount of those through that indirect cost model because of moratorium related attorney support and also review of code revisions. This budget leaves about $139,000 in contingency. However, this is significantly less than the beginning balance of $382,000. Tyler, Kelly, anything you want to add?
No, I'll just wait to answer any questions we have.
Same with me.
We might get through this one. I thought you might have a question.
I didn't. It's just a big, it was just staring at me on the page when I turned it. It was, the contingency is so high. It's 9.3% compared to everything else.
Yeah,
Why?
I mean, I think that's a bigger policy discussion. So since I've worked here for a decade and a half, it's carryover budgeting, expenditure control budgeting. So I'm a very fiscally conservative person. I could spend a lot more and then the carryover would be a lot less, but I'm very frugal with my department's money. And with both planning and building, they ride the coaster of the economy, of the moratorium now, of tariffs, of everything else. And so all my projections on my revenues in both of my divisions
You think
are
that was
totally
the
speculative.
building?
That's my next one.
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah, I mean, the last point that Kelly made is really the big one from my perspective when developing this budget or finalizing the department's proposal. And, you know, if development applications decrease significantly, but it's only for a period of time, you know, we want to avoid laying off staff as much as possible. And so having contingency in this department to absorb any decreased revenue from moratorium is key.
But since the moratorium's been going for such a long time now, don't we have a pretty good predictor on what the revenue stream will be over the course of the next year and a half?
No.
Still?
And one of the big reasons is we have no idea when we're gonna get those 190 ERUs. We've been going back and forth with the council on alternative treatment systems for a year now, and hopefully we'll have some adopted this summer. So there's a lot of unknowns that I have no way to budget appropriately. Another big thing is a lot of what you saw in my budget this time around was middle housing applications that came in on the heels of Senate Bill 457. There's no room to do those anymore because we can't approve anymore into the moratorium. That was like $50,000 right there alone. There was several other big land use applications that were still kind of coming in at the beginning of the last budget cycle because they were right around the beginning of the moratorium. Those have all dried up now. So what we're receiving right now is like a bunch of $150, $200 permits. Yeah, there's a few $10,000, $15,000 ones in there, like the art studio on Pioneer. That was like a $10,000 application.
But we're banking on getting that 190 ERU allocation in this next biennium. Is that, I mean, is that what?
That's 12 to 18 months.
I didn't factor that really into my budget.
That's not got, and that's not factored in.
No, because if it's 2 years from now, that's like the end of the next budget cycle.
Right.
It's so next budget cycle, I definitely will factor that in. But this next 2 years, I'm hopeful that we get some money through that allocation program. But I can't bank on that. Similar to grants, I can't bank that that's gonna happen in this next budget cycle.
I was actually gonna wonder if the contingency was enough. I work for City of Portland Development Services.
Say no more.
We've gone through $90 million in reserves. Yeah, since COVID. The boom bust is real. And we're lucky enough to have that as a reserve because of the booms, but you get down real low and it's hard because you still have to process applications in that time period. You have to put everything through. So I mean, realistically, is there is there room for more in the contingency? Thank you, by the way, Kelly, for being conservative with the budget.
I'll just be honest, I don't spend a lot. I know right now we're in a moratorium, there's a lot of unknowns. I told my staff we're not going to a lot of conferences, we're not doing a lot of trainings. So I mean, we're running a pretty lean budget right now on purpose.
I think another issue around the corner is there's some very mandated legislation that's being passed daily that's really going to affect your department. Like instead of having a 120-day approval process, it's cutting down to 30 days.
But if we're under a moratorium, that doesn't apply to us.
Well, some of it will. Especially the middle housing.
But I mean, they've already gotten approval for all the stuff, so.
Janet's correct, there's some new legislation coming down around building permit application timelines, planning timelines, and also engineering plan review timelines. So I don't really know fully how that will affect us yet, but she is correct that there'll be some effect on our
But
department.
that's stuff to get the final order out.
Not all of it, no, some of the new legislation's actually around engineering plan review and building permit turnaround time.
I'm curious about we've talked about I guess I'll kind of hold off on this question. I'll bring it back later. It's about the housing production strategy, in light of our moratorium, going forward with that. In light of moratorium, I don't know, that we need to kind of decide.
I mean, we already have a signed contract for that and we're already paying the contractor, so.
Yeah, DLCD was not favorable, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
Like
So
the
that's
polite term.
News to me.
The problem is if you delayed it, we looked into this extensively with our attorney as well.
Can we
You
didn't
delayed
talk to
it.
the council about it?
Well, I talked to Tyler about it, so I don't know what
I
that.
sent an update in a weekend update, gosh,
Okay.
couple months ago now, probably at this point. It was either the weekend update or in a separate correspondence, but I did provide an update on that, and we have a consultant coming to talk to the council May 19th.
Yeah, in about 3 weeks.
That's when the council meeting.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah.
FCS group.
Um,
Yeah, I'm not gonna go into long because this is a budget conversation, not a housing production conversation. But what I will say is if we would have delayed it, we would have entered into the ONA rulemaking efforts in 2 years. Right now, we don't enter them in until we get it adopted, and then it'll be 8 years after that. So right now, we're about 9 years from following the ONA. If we would have basically told DLCD we don't want to do it right now, it would have happened in 2 years.
I'm talking about a budget issue. I'm talking about things like the zoning map amendments were in the last budget and never got done. So I am talking about budget, and I'm just also a little bit, I just want to understand, we've gone from 280,000 of general revenue up to 920 last year and 850 this biennium.
Yeah, 300,000 of that was for the new code enforcement officer right now. So that was.
Pardon?
300,000 of that was for the new code enforcement officer. So when you guys decided to fund the second code enforcement specialist position, it added, from 547 to 920, so.
Yeah, so
300
the
something else.
code enforcement specialist is about $265,000. I think part of that jump
Doing a
from,
great job.
I think part of the jump from the 21-23 biennium to 23-25 was not just the code enforcement, but there was some additional allocation of general revenue for some comp plan expenditures.
Yes.
I believe, which is why you saw such a significant jump there.
if you were to remove, you know, the code enforcement officer, not proposing the removal, but just from a dollar perspective, if that money wasn't there, you know, you'd be looking at $585,000 of general revenue that would be needed, which is much more in line with that 21-23
All right.
allocation.
Okay, and the last comment I do have is the mention of on the goals about the work with the planning commission to modify municipal code, urban forestry. And so that tree retention protection, blah, 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 all that. I think the plan for that is to actually kind of have some folks involved in kind of a tree task force that have experience in that subject. And then that would get, you know, forwarded to both the planning commission and the city council for approval. So,
Kind of like back when we did the tree ordinance to begin with,
pardon?
where we had a committee,
Yeah.
when we did the first tree ordinance.
The tree committee.
I just wanted to touch on one thing you said. There was $50,000 allocated to a zoning map update in the existing budget cycle.
Yep.
That $50,000 has been transferred to the planning department. That work has not been done, but it's reflected in the carry forward into the next biennium. And Kelly and I have talked about the work that needs to be done there. So
Yeah.
not done yet, but that funding,
Is that reflected in the 139,000 contingency carryover? or
it's
somewhere else?
not, it's reflected in the beginning balance and then
Oh, okay.
in the contracted services for planning, I believe. Is that right, Kelly, where we plugged that? Yeah. zone map?
So
Yeah.
the contract services for planning is the zone map, the housing production strategy, and I think about 25,000 for Pleasant Tree Master Plan.
So it's reflected in there. That might absorb into the abyss. We've got it allocated for the upcoming biennium.
Any
So-
more questions for planning?
Just one more. I want to give myself there, and maybe it's just late, Kelly, and I'm lost my mind. That extra 100,000 in contingency. What are we earmarking that for again? I mean, I know you're frugal, I know you save money, but I know it's unpredictable budget, so we're sticking the 100,000
I mean-
extra there.
Yeah,
For what?
Totally contingency.
it's if my revenues even dry up more than I'm projecting. And like I said, I think this is a much bigger policy discussion. If the council chooses in future budget cycles to go away from expenditure control budgeting and carryovers, then I think you'll see, and I think other people that work for other government agencies like Mr. Wagner and probably Mr. Pizzold as well, you'll see, I think, a lot different spending coming from
Yeah,
departments.
the approach they take on it, right?
And it's gonna be spent at the end of the budget, so
Well,
they
it's
get
what it
your
was
carryover.
before Sandy went to the biennium and that plan, it was spend it or lose it.
Yeah,
And people just went crazy at the end of the year and spent out the rest of the
I'm
budget.
just hedging how much money we give to each department for contingency. And if some of that money is better allocated towards other things, if we don't have a use for it right now. And when I see 2% across the board naturally, and then we see a department with 10, it just makes me wonder, hey, is there any, are we, maybe some of that was our library money for the bus, or
You just
maybe
need to
some of that was
consider the
for
departments.
parks, or so. I'm just
Yeah.
making comments, so
Yeah.
I want to know what your thought was, but I do understand the not being able to predict revenue streams, given our circumstance with the moratorium, and that you would potentially need that, have you have shortfalls in revenue.
Once the moratoriums are, we're gonna hold it to a standard, but right now there's a moratorium.
I mean, the intent is for those indirect service departments, admin, finance, HR, IT, who really have a much smaller level of risk in the nature of their operations, to just have that 2% for the unforeseen thing. Maybe it's an insurance change with an employee, or, you know, a computer dies and you gotta go buy a new one, whatever it is. Those direct service departments, like parks, like planning, like police, should have more than 2%, because there's, you know, bigger variables in their day-to-day operations. It's linked to permit revenue, or they've got a slew of vehicles that maybe all have a maintenance issue, or a series of flat tires, or whatever that is. Or you have an unexpected parks issue that, you know, comes up and something needs to be fixed. And so there should be more than 2% in those department budgets. We could certainly talk about, you know, is there an upper threshold that the council would like to see going forward, the budget committee would like to see, so that we don't get too much. That's part of the reason why you'll note that the general revenue allocation to planning was decreased from the last biennium, in an attempt to not give too much of a contingency in that department. But enough to weather the storm if there is something that really hits Kelly's permit revenue over the next 2 years.
I appreciate it.
Can you
think
just
that
clarify
there's-
between planning and sign fees versus permit administration fees?
Permit administration fees are the fees that we charge for planning to review permits through the building division, so that's when it gets to like building permit stage review. And planning and sign fees are associated with planning review, like at the final order stage.
Okay. Any other questions?
I was just gonna make one more point. I think that there's definitely an emphasis on trying to, especially with the general fund departments. Smooth and stabilize the general fund allocations, obviously it's not gonna be perfectly possible,
No.
but to a certain extent, try to make them as smooth and consistent as possible. As to not inadvertently create holes in subsequent bienniums. For example, if we entirely decrease the general revenue allocation to, bring that contingency down a lot further, we'd be burning through a lot of that beginning balance in the current biennium, and then in the next biennium, there'd have to be a larger request. Well, maybe those funds already got earmarked in other ongoing expenses, and so that's part of the risk.
I agree. So, let's move on to building, and we have 7 minutes to get through building.
Ready, set, hurry up. Building division ensures that commercial and industrial buildings, residential dwellings, and public buildings such as schools are constructed in conformance with all regulatory codes to ensure continued safety and well-being for all people. The department also manages the business licensing program. This budget is largely in line with the prior biennium. The department is fully funded through permit fees and receives no general fund revenue funding. Permit fee revenue is budgeted in line with the prior, the permit fee revenue budgeted for the next biennium is budgeting a modest reduction from the current biennium forecasted actual. So when you look at the budget on here, it looks like we're budgeting an increase. Actually, we're budgeting a slight reduction from what the actuals ended up as for 23-25. Contractual services reflects $100,000 in expenses related to the electronic plan review services, and contingency is about $290,000.
So again, on this one, you can't, whatever is collected by the building fund as a revenue, I think I said this 2 years ago, and 2 years ago before that, has to stay in this fund. So it's a dedicated fund. So the contingency is high. Even more important on this one because it doesn't get any tax revenue. And even if the contingency was $2 million by state law, it still can't be moved to any more fund.
What's itemized out in the contractual services that makes it go from 10,000 to 100,000?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. 100,000 is a total guess. Because we've never done electronic plan review in the building division in the city of Sandy. This is a brand new thing that we are required to start on January 1st by state law. We have a very experienced building official that has, I think, the second most credentials in the state of Oregon right now. However, he's been very upfront with me. He's not very comfortable with the electronic plan review. He's been taking courses on it. But he basically needs assistance with it.
And even despite a level of comfortability or not, the workload and volume of work that the building official does currently would not lend itself to being able to effectively manage the workload of electronic plan review.
And that's a good point that Tyler made. And in the past, we actually have had other part-time plan reviewers on staff. We had a gentleman that was about, I don't know, half-time for about 1.5 years. And before him, we had another guy that was about half-time for about 4 or 5 years. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to really find anyone interested in that.
So you just go outside with the work.
We've hired State Built Services, which is one of the largest third-party review companies in the nation. Yeah, I mean, as I've talked to Tyler, and I'll probably talk to the council in the future, once our current building official does decide to retire, which he's told me is going to be in the next couple of years, probably this next biennium, the city is going to have to think about how to move forward on that. he does a very high volume of work. And he has, like I said, a lot of credentials. There's almost no one in the state of Oregon that can do plumbing, building, mechanical, and residential electrical. There's like nobody. So we'll have to talk about rehiring a building official position, but then also doing more contractual services probably.
And then my last question is for Tyler. It's really about the salaries, and I understand there's raises that happen or projections over time. But I looked at the FTE growth here versus the FTE decline in planning, and it looks like the rate of increase for dollars is up dramatically. Like from 401, if I just divide it by the 2.25, which it was, to the 2.35 that it is, it should only be about 420. And then I'm assuming the other 42,000 is rate increase, maybe for the 2-year projection. But on the previous one we just reviewed, it actually staffing total went down, but the dollars went up. So it just seems like the algorithm's different for each of them. Does that make sense?
I'm sorry, were you talking about salaries or?
Yeah,
indirect
line
support
one
costs?
salary.
I'm sorry. Yeah, so the salaries is completely reflective of just, cost of living adjustments or step increases, for those staff.
For what's in there.
For what's, currently on the books. I think,
And then a minor increase in designation for time on building, right? Because it went up by 0.1.
yeah, slight reallocation of, gosh, was it your time, Cohen?
No, it's code enforcement.
Code enforcement, that's right, because part of the code enforcement officers or code enforcement specialist position is enforcing the development code. So last biennium, when we hired him, it was all paid for out of planning. Because he's not doing just general code enforcement, but some tied to the development code. 90% of that salary is out of planning now and 10% out of building, just to more accurately reflect where he's spending his time.
Thank you.
Most of his cases are planning, but a few of his big cases, the last 2 years, like the house on Bluff by Tollgate, that was more building code related actually.
And we have internal tracking measures in place so that if a citation is issued for a development code, building code violation, that citation revenue goes back into the building department, and if it's more planning related, that it's going back into the planning department. So we've got that covered on our end.
So I just I'm not quite understanding this contractual services, but so some contractor that we're gonna hire is gonna do some of our building inspections and approve permits for plumbing, building, mechanical, fire, life and safety and all that. Is that what we're saying?
No, they're not, we didn't hire them yet to do any inspection work. It's all plan review work. So
Plan
it's when we
review.
get electronic plan review sets in, they would be reviewing those for instead of our building official. Because up until January 1st, we never did any electronic plan review. It was all done paper copy. And starting on January 1st, we're not doing electronic plan review.
But the applicant is not required to submit it electronically, right? They
No,
can still
no.
submit paper
And it-
plans.
that's
We just have
correct.
to offer the ability to, which is part of the reason why that $100,000 is a little bit of a plug, because we don't know how many people will submit electronically.
100%. And so far, honestly, not many people are taking us up on it. So the 100,000 might, at the end of the biennium, say it might only be 30,000, which would then just make the contingency higher, and then it'll give us a more realistic number to work with next.
So this is plan review for building code, is that?
For building permits, yeah, exactly, for building code.
Okay, and the reason I get, because we have plan review that, planning
Right.
commission and you do that. And so I'm like, well, why do we have so much money up here in planning?
Yeah,
And
no.
yet we're doing the planning review in building.
This would be building code, so Oregon plumbing code, Oregon mechanical code, fire life safety, and Oregon building code. Yeah, exactly.
We have reached the end of tonight's meeting. We will carry over economic development and unfortunately, those departments to the next meeting. And in fact, we'll probably let him go first and then you can do the economic right before we do the funds. But it's 10:01 and thank you, everybody, for your questions and your input tonight.
Chair, may I add one more thing?
Sure, you.
Not about a budget, but just general information. So if you have any questions on the budget document, anything we talked about this evening, or anything that we're going to talk about next week, if you want to send those questions to us in advance, we will do our best to proactively answer them or at least have responses prepared. So just keep that in mind, that offer stands. Otherwise, thank you. for your
We can
time
take
this
these
evening.
with us, right? Just bring them
Take
back.
that with you, yes.
Thank you, Linda, for being,
You want to leave it here?
Sure.
I don't want to